And we are live for Sunday, week 13. How we doing, everyone? I hope we all had a fantastic Thanksgiving. There's been already 4 great games in week 13. We got a great slate of games ahead of us today as well. A lot to talk through. Weatherman Sam is going to be active today. Lots of weather being discussed here on week 13 this great Sunday. How we doing, everyone? I'm pumped to get after it. This is going to be a fantastic day. We got 2 weeks left in most fantasy leagues until the fantasy football playoffs. That's what it's all about. In a lot of your leagues, I know we're already locked into the playoffs, but in a lot of leagues out there, you got to get a couple wins just to get in. That's what it's all about. Happy Football Sunday to everyone out there. Shout out to everyone who's already tuned in. You guys are the true OGs. Seriously, hit the like button if you're watching live on YouTube. It takes 2 seconds. Let's get all 22 of you in the YouTube live already to smash the like button. If you're watching live on TikTok, guys, hit the follow button. We're going to get to hundreds of start-sit questions on this live. Like we've been doing, though, we're going to go game by game to start out. And let's start out with this Houston Texans versus Jacksonville Jaguars game. A lot of very good fantasy options in this game. Let's start out with the Texans. Nico Collins is our wide receiver 2 this week. He was wide receiver 1 all week until we started projecting Devontae Smith out this morning. Now A.J. Brown's up to wide receiver 1. Regardless, Nico is going to absolutely smash this week versus the Jacksonville Jaguars. The Jaguars have been the worst defense in the NFL this season. They rank second worst versus wide receivers. They rank worst versus running backs. Joe Mixon, coming off his worst game of the season, he projects as the running back 1 this week. His worst game of the season, he still fell just below 10 points because he had 5 catches, his most of the season. So in his worst game of the season, he had his most receptions of the season. Joe Mixon still at number 2 in fantasy points per game, I believe only behind Saquon Barkley. CJ Stroud is a great option this week. This has not been the year 2 people have expected for CJ Stroud. He only has gone over 20 fantasy points once this entire season. He's likely going over 20 points, though, today. And in fact, the only game he went over 20 points, it came against this Jacksonville Jaguars defense back in week 4. He threw for 345 and 2 TDs. He's got a healthy Nico Collins, a healthy Tank Dell. By the way, Nico Collins in that game versus the Jags, he had his best game of the season, 33 points. He was the wide receiver 1 that week, had 12 catches, 151 and a touchdown. And Steph Diggs was also in that game. You know, Steph Diggs obviously out for the season, has been out for the season for a little while. But yeah, the ceiling is absolutely astronomical for Nico Collins today. Would not be surprising to see him go over 150 yards and score multiple touchdowns, especially if the game is close. Tank Dell, he's more of a borderline back-end wide receiver 2, high-end flex. I put him in the high-end flex category. Let me switch over to, let me pull up the wide receiver ranks here on both live streams. I know a lot of difficult wide receiver decisions today. I think wide receiver and running back probably the toughest positions to think through today. I'll pull up the wide receiver ranks here, but Tank Dell is an okay option. We haven't seen the ceiling like we saw last year from Tank. No games over 20 points for Tank Dell. He actually didn't play in this game versus the Jags last time. It was just Steph Diggs and Nico out there. Really good matchup, though, for the receivers here. So Tank Dell definitely has a good ceiling. I don't hate him as a flex option or your wide receiver 2. The Texans kicker, he projects his kicker 1 rest of the week. We already had our kicker 1 play. I think that was in the Lions game. I believe the Lions kicker was the kicker 1 for our projections this week. But yeah, Dalton Schultz, he's not even a top 12 tight end projection. We'll get to the running back ranks here soon. But yeah, I feel great about Mixon, about Nico, about Stroud. I think Stroud is about as good of an option as he's been all season. Tank Dell is also a pretty high upside flex option. He's not a must start, though. The Texans, by the way, they are in Jacksonville in this game. They're only 3.5-point favorites in Jacksonville. This game is expected to be close, and partially because we got Trevor Lawrence returning. So let's go to the Jaguar side of the ball now. Trevor Lawrence comes back. We have not seen Trevor Lawrence play since week 9 against the Philadelphia Eagles. He was actually starting to heat up a little bit. He had 3 rushing touchdowns in his last 2 starts, over 20 points in both of those. He had at least 15 points in his last 5 games. Feels like a bit of a lost season for Trevor Lawrence and the Jags. Surprising to see the fantasy production, though. We've seen more high high-end fantasy production from Trevor Lawrence this season than we have CJ Stroud. The Texans are also a pretty good matchup for the passing offense. I have a lot of confidence in Brian Thomas Jr. today, and I think you should too. He's a top 12 wide receiver of the receivers left this week. Again, if you're watching live on YouTube or TikTok, the rankings I have up, these are the rest of week rankings. So nobody that's already played is going to be in these rankings. Nobody that is played on Thursday or Friday will be in these rankings. There's no buys this week. But it also includes guys that are injured. They won't include guys that are injured. So Devontae Smith, I'm projecting him out right now. So you won't find him in the rankings either. Yeah, Brian Thomas Jr., I'm really not benching him in almost any spots. I'm going to be telling a lot of people to start Brian Thomas Jr. today. There is no Christian Kirk. There is no Gabe Davis. It's Evan Ingram and Brian Thomas Jr. today against the Texans, who have been really crushed by receivers of late. Brian Thomas Jr. is playing the most snaps he's ever played. 3 straight games, over 85% snap percentage. He didn't do that in a single game prior. He's coming out of the bye week. He's going to be close to 100% snap participation. He is going to lead the team almost definitely in targets. If it's not him, it's going to be Evan Ingram. The Texans are allowing the most receiving touchdowns to wide receivers this season. We've seen some very big wide receiver performances, and Calvin Ridley just went over 90 yards. Tyler Boyd, Calvin Ridley, Nick Westbrook-Akine, they combined for 13 catches and almost 180 yards. We saw something similar from the Cowboys receivers, something similar from the Lions receivers. The Jets on that Thursday night game, we saw both Adams and Garrett Wilson go for 7 catches, 90 yards, and at least a touchdown. The ceiling for Brian Thomas Jr. today is 100-plus yards, 1+ touchdown, and I think the floor is close to 50 yards in 3 or 4 catches. So you got to be starting Brian Thomas Jr. today in this matchup versus the Texans. The Jags are 3.5-point underdogs again versus the Texans at home, which makes a pretty good spot for the passing offense. Evan Ingram's also a good option this week. Evan Ingram, I think, is pretty underrated amongst tight ends heading into this game. He's had at least 4 catches every single game since week 6. He's been pretty consistent. And this isn't the best matchup for him, but the Texans have struggled versus slot wide receivers. And Evan Ingram is basically the slot wide receiver for the Jags. So he's got a decent floor in this one. Trevor Lawrence, too, back when Trevor Lawrence was playing, we saw a game where he had 10 catches for 102. That's the type of ceiling Evan Ingram has in this game. He's tight end 6. I would play Taysom Hill over him. There's not very many tight ends left this week that I'm not going to play Taysom Hill over. It's McBride, Kittle, and then it's Taysom. I'd play Taysom over Hawkinson, over Njoku, and then it's Evan Ingram. Pretty clear tier, I think, at tight ends. This week we'll get to the tight end start sits. Of course, let me switch to the running back ranks here as we go to the next game. So I think that this is going to be a close one between the Texans and the Jags. I ultimately think that the Texans beat this spread of 3.5, but I think a big game from Brian Thomas Jr. and or Evan Ingram is coming. I also really don't want to start these Jags running backs. The Texans ranked 6th best versus running backs this season, and it's going to be an even split between ETN and Bigsby. Bigsby probably getting the bulk of the carries, ETN probably getting the bulk of the receiving work. Don't be surprised if Dearness Johnson mixes in still. I mean, just a mess of a backfield for fantasy in a game where they're going to be underdogs, and I think going to have to throw a lot with Trevor Lawrence in the lineup. Let's switch over to the running back ranks here. So both ETN and Bigsby are on my must-bench list this week if you can. All right, so that's the Jags-Texans game. Let's go to a banger of a football game we got in New England today. The Patriots, 2.5-point underdogs versus the Indianapolis Colts. Let's start with the Colts here, who I expect to win this game. They're 2.5-point favorites, a little bit less than I would have expected. They're dealing with a lot of injuries. 4 offensive line injuries for the Texans. I mean, their whole starting offensive line is basically not playing. You also have Josh Downs out, who's been their leading receiver this season. But Anthony Richardson, Jonathan Taylor, Michael Pittman Jr., I think Adonai Mitchell will have a very big role in this game. Alec Pierce is going to play. He was questionable for this spot. That would have been even better for Adonai Mitchell for fantasy if Alec Pierce wasn't going to play. He's battling through a foot injury, Alec Pierce. I think Anthony Richardson is a very good fantasy option, though. His over-under rushing yards is at 45.5. He has been running a lot, and he's got a great chance at rushing touchdowns each week. He's got almost 100 rushing yards over his last 2 games and 2 rushing touchdowns. He's got 20 rushing attempts in his last 2 games, 10 each in the last 2. He had a 47% rush share in his last game. I mean, that's great for fantasy. I think Anthony Richardson is definitely startable this week versus the Pats. We've seen the Patriots get absolutely destroyed by quarterbacks over their last 2 games. They've allowed almost 700 passing yards and 8 touchdowns to quarterbacks. That was Stafford and Tua, much different quarterbacks, obviously, than Anthony Richardson. But there's a real ceiling here for A-Rich. Would not be shocking to see him finish as a top 5 QB here in week 13. You could do much worse than Anthony Richardson. Let me switch over to the QB ranks here on both live streams. We're live on TikTok and YouTube, by the way, guys. On the YouTube live, I can share a screen. If you're watching live on TikTok, guys, come to the YouTube live. I'm telling you, it's the better viewing experience. Link is right in the TikTok bio. These are only rankings for the guys that have not played yet this week. This is this week, rest of this week rankings. We're locked in to all the decisions you got to make today. That's what these rankings are for. All right, I'll switch over to the QB ranks here on the YouTube live as well. But Anthony Richardson, definitely an intriguing ceiling option. He's got a bit of a low floor with the volatility we've seen in the pass game from him. We saw just 2 weeks ago, I was arguing 2 weeks ago, is the best pass game we've ever seen from Anthony Richardson. Maybe just the best overall game we've seen, when you consider the pass game component. He really took a step back, though, against the Lions. Only 39% completion percentage, 6.1 yards per attempt. I mean, absolutely brutal. Right back to where he's been most of the season. So we'll see if he can bounce back here in an easier matchup versus the Pats. I think there's a decent chance that he does. And then Jonathan Taylor, he's been a big disappointment for most of the last month. We haven't seen him go over 14.5 PPR points since week 8. Before that, he missed 3 games. So it's been over 2 months since we've seen Jonathan Taylor go over 20 fantasy points. He's got a great chance to do it today, though, versus the Pats. The offensive line injuries are definitely not helping Jonathan Taylor. Anthony Richardson is definitely not good for Jonathan Taylor for fantasy. He's getting less targets, and he's getting goal line touchdowns stolen from him. We have not seen Anthony Richardson score since week 8. He has 1 touchdown since week 4, Jonathan Taylor. He's still averaging over half a touchdown per game, though, and the Colts are favored in this game. This is not a bad matchup for Jonathan Taylor. The Patriots are allowing almost 1 rushing touchdown per game to running backs, over 100 rushing yards per game to running backs. Achane and Jalen Wright, they didn't do much last week versus the Pats, but Kyron Williams went for over 80 yards. We saw Tony Pollard destroy the Pats over 100 yards. He actually combined for over 150. We actually haven't seen a running back score on the ground, though, since week 8. That was Braylon Allen. Devon Achane scored 2 receiving touchdowns. The JT, a high-end RB2 this week, or back-end running back 1 is where I would rank him. I like Michael Pittman a lot. With Josh Downs out, I think he's locked into a very significant target share in this game. Christian Gonzalez is good. He's probably going to be matching up against Pittman most of the game, but the target share should be there. One of Pittman or Adonai Mitchell is going to have a big game here. And I think Adonai Mitchell is the interesting sleeper of the two. Obviously, Pittman, not a sleeper, especially with Downs out. I think everyone's expecting pretty good things. But if Christian Gonzalez ends up shadowing Michael Pittman Jr. in this game, watch out for Adonai Mitchell, because we really haven't seen a full game from AD Mitchell, except for week 10. He had 6 catches, 71 yards in that game, 13.1 points against a good Bills secondary. This is a pretty suspect Patriots defense outside of just a few key players. And AD Mitchell has been, when he's been on the field, he's getting targeted near the highest rate in the league, a 31% target per route run rate. He's been over 30% like almost every single game. Last week, he was at 33%. He just has not been running many routes. We actually had his over last week. He fell 2 yards short on that. We've got a couple bad beats with the props recently, but we got a few good props to bounce back with this week that I feel great about. But yeah, AD Mitchell is going to be near 90+% snap percentage in this game with Josh Downs out. Alec Pierce questionable with a foot injury. He's likely to play, and Alec Pierce will probably have a role as well. But yeah, AD Mitchell or Pittman, I expect one of these two guys to show out today. The Colts defense definitely in play. They project as a top 2 defensive option. I feel pretty good about the Colts defense. I'll switch over to the wide receiver ranks, seeing someone ask about that. Switch back to the wide receiver ranks here as well. But yeah, AD Mitchell, he doesn't rank great. I think he's an interesting sleeper, though, for sure. Definitely there's a underrated ceiling for Adonai Mitchell, just because we've only really seen one game where he played the full game, and he's been very effective when he's been out there, and he's been earning targets when he's been out there. This game is projected to be close, too. All right, so that's the Colts side of the ball. I expect the Colts to win this game. As a Pats fan, I hope the Colts win this game, and I hope Drake May continues to look good. And he struggled last week. The offensive line has obviously been a huge reason for that. He's really not a guy you need to be starting in fantasy this week versus the Colts. The rushing has been there for Drake May. He's near the top of the league in yards per carry, 8.7 yards per carry for Drake May this season. He doesn't have the top end speed, but he's definitely got the ability to pick his spots wisely in the run game. Ramondre Stevenson, he's a borderline must bench coming off a 3.3 point game last week versus the Dolphins. He had 13 yards last week. 13 yards. What, do you have like a 2-point conversion? Yeah, he had a 2-point conversion. That was over half his points last week. The snap percentage was only at 42%. I mean, he was just straight up outplayed by Antonio Gibson last week, and he played less than Antonio Gibson last week. I don't expect that to stick this week, but just the fact that it happened last week is definitely super concerning. Ramondre Stevenson's got a really low floor. We've seen him under 13 points 3 straight games. We've seen him under 10 points now with 6 times this season, 5 times this season, and we've seen the ceiling at times too, but the matchup's not bad here versus the Colts. The Colts allowing the 3rd most points per game to running backs this season. The Colts just got destroyed by the Lions running backs, as most teams do. Breece Hall went over 30 points versus them back in week 11. So the running backs have somewhat of a ceiling, but it's really tough to trust Ramondre in this game. Demario Douglas, he was questionable for this game with an ankle injury. He's expected to play. Kendrick Bourne, Demario Douglas, and Kayshon Boutte. These are the top 3 receivers pretty clearly forming for the Patriots. And some other guys will get some run. The 2 rookie receivers, Polk, Baker, they've been entirely disappointing, well off the fantasy radar. That's the Pats. I mean, really, there's not a single must start for the Pats. Hunter Henry's maybe the most startable guy on the Patriots right now among tight ends. He's had at least 9 points now in, 6 of his last 7 games. Hard to find that at tight end. Not a bad matchup for him. Pats are underdogs in this game. So yeah, it's Mondre, it's Henry. They're borderline starts, but really risky to start anyone, I think, in this offense. And I think the Colts cover the spread here of 2.5 as well in New England. We'll get to the weather in that game too. It's going to be cold. That's the weather report. In most of these games, it's going to be cold. I don't care. We talked about this with the Dolphins game, and they talked about it a million times on the broadcast. These guys can play through, normal cold weather. This isn't extreme cold. Extreme cold is what we saw in the Dolphins-Chiefs game last playoffs. That's extreme cold. That's going to have a significant impact on the game. But, feels like 15 degrees, feels like 10 degrees, 12 degrees. It's really not going to have a dramatic impact on the game. They're going to talk about it a ton, but there's a few games like that this week, and it's actually even a little bit warmer than that. Like this Pats game is going to feel around 20 degrees. There's just not significant winds. And even in this Bills 49ers game, which we're going to get to, there's not significant snow happening during the game. There's not significant wind happening during the game. It's going to be fine. I'm really not overreacting to any weather today. We're going to get to that later on in the live. All right, that's the Colts and Pats game. So far, we've gotten through the Texans, the Jags, the Colts, and the Pats. I think the Texans and the Colts, the 2 slight favorites in those games on the road, both take the dubs there. All right, on to the Titans Commanders game. This is definitely a very interesting one. The Titans defense is dealing with a couple of different pretty big injuries. I expect the Commanders offense to have a day here. The Jaden Daniels, he still projects as a top 10 QB, a little bit lower than he has projected. He's been a bit disappointing over the last month, but last week, man, 74 rushing yards and a touchdown, got a get-right spot versus the Cowboys. He was the QB1 last week, 32 fantasy points for Jaden Daniels. All right, we're going to get to why Judy's so high in a second. I'll hop over to the running back ranks here again on both live streams. We'll get back to the QBs. I'll show the tight ends here in a second as well. But Jaden Daniels, a very high floor option here versus the Titans. Titans with a couple different key defensive injuries as well. Definitely bodes well for the entire Commanders offense. They put Austin Eckler on IR. Austin Eckler out for the next 4 games, including this week. So 3 more games after this week for Austin Eckler, at least. He's dealing with a concussion that he sustained at the very end of the game last week, returning a punt. I mean, some of these teams cannot get out of their own way. Hopefully Austin Eckler gets right, before the NFL playoffs, but he's probably pretty much done for the rest of the fantasy football season. And that's pretty big for both Brian Robinson Jr. and Jeremy McNichols. They're not just going to give all of this Austin Eckler work to Brian Robinson Jr. We've seen this at points during this season when both B-Rob or Eckler has been out. They're mixing other guys in still. And Jeremy McNichols, he's basically going to step right into that Eckler role, more or less. I think B-Rob's got slightly better touchdown upside now, though we've only seen him score once since week 7. He probably gets in the end zone more than that moving forward. He probably gets a pretty significant workload in this game versus the Titans. The Titans have been pretty good versus running backs, 13th best versus running backs, the 5th fewest rushing yards, but they've been about average in terms of the touchdowns. B-Rob is still a pretty touchdown-dependent running back, though. He projects as running back 19. I'd play him over Ramondre Stevenson For example, in Terry McLaurin, he's definitely a decent start this week. Consider me a little bit skeptical on Terry McLaurin at this point. Most of his fantasy points came on one 80-yard play in the last drive of the game last week. I mean, this was a pretty misleading fantasy total for him. I think it was like one catch, 80 yards, and a touchdown. So he had 4 catches for 20 yards and no touchdown. He had 6 points before that one play, and then he finishes with 21.2. Not the best matchup versus the Titans. The Commanders do spread the ball around a lot. We have not seen super significant target shares from McLaurin. He's been under 20% target share now in 4 straight games. We have not seen Terry McLaurin go over 25% target share since week 5. He's been pretty consistent from a fantasy perspective. He's gotten it for at least 15 points in all of those games because he's getting big plays down the field. He's scoring touchdowns when he's not making big plays down the field. And he's been over 100 yards in 4 of his last 6. And he scored 2 touchdowns in the one game. He only had 2 catches. Week 11 was a huge disappointment in a tough matchup. But this is not the best matchup for Scary Terry today. The Commanders are 6.5-point favorites in this game as well. 6-point favorites at home. So yeah, Terry's a good start, not a must start. Projects as wide receiver 19 amongst the receivers left. There's only running backs here on this list that haven't played yet. This is the rest of this week projections. Yeah, we're going to talk about Weatherman. Weatherman Sam's got you with the 49ers Bills game. We're going to get to that game here coming up shortly. All right, so that's Commanders offense. We're starting B-Rob. McLaurin's not a bad start. B-Rob's not a bad start. Zach Ertz, by the way, he's actually been incredibly consistent. I mean, he actually has a really strong floor right now in fantasy. He's got at least 6 catches in back-to-back games. He scored in back-to-back games. There's just no real ceiling for Ertz. I mean, I think we've seen what the ceiling is really over the last 2 games. 18.7 points, 15.8 points. It's just so hard for me to get excited about Zach Ertz, who, by the way, his target shares, they've been better than Terry McLaurin every single game for the last 3 weeks. Crazy stuff, man. That's why I'm a little bit down on Scary Terry right now. But yeah, I think Zach Ertz is startable in certain spots, but there's a lot of tight ends I'd play over him. I'd play Taysom Hill over him, so easily. We're going to get to Taysom Hill later on. The Commanders defense, by the way, very much in play here versus the Titans. They rank as the 3rd best defense left this week. Definitely an option. Noah Brown also, we should probably touch on him quickly because he's actually been a pretty sneakily underrated option over the past few weeks. He had a 29% target share last week. So he's actually beaten Terry McLaurin in target share in 3 of the last 4 games. I think he's leading the team in target share over the last month. That's Noah Brown. Really, ever since he caught that Hail Mary, he suddenly had a big role in this offense, at least 6 targets in 4 of his last 5 games. He's definitely a very interesting sleeper for DraftKings and FanDuel tournaments. His ownership's going to come in super low. He's an interesting sleeper just in general. Bailey or AD Mitchell. Yeah, that's close, man. That's close. It's probably Bailey. But we'll get to that game later on too. We did already talk about AD Mitchell. I do like AD Mitchell as a pretty good sleeper. There's a ceiling there for AD Mitchell. He's been targeted at the 14th highest rate in the NFL when on the field. He just hasn't been on the field that much. And he's going to be on the field a ton today, probably 90% plus snap percentage. Let's hop back over to the wide receiver rank, seeing people ask for that. I'll hop up to QBs on the YouTube live. All right, so that's the Commanders. Noah Brown, a very intriguing sleeper. He's out-targeted Terry McLaurin. Him and Zach Ertz have out-targeted Terry McLaurin over the last month. That makes me a little bit nervous about McLaurin. And without Eckler, B-Rob's definitely an interesting option. For the Titans, I mean, you got to be pretty excited about Calvin Ridley, I think, every single week. At this point, the role has been really just incredible. He hasn't gone under 9.8 points. He's hitting over 100 air yards almost every single game. Last week was his first game under 100 air yards since week 4. He had 77 air yards last week. Still finished with 5 catches, 93 yards. Versus the Texans, the air yard share has been massive. He's got the 4th highest percentage of his team's air yards this season. He's got the 3rd most air yards just in total. He has not been under a 20% target share once in the last 7 games. He's just so by far the best receiver on this team and the clear target leader on this team. So you got to feel pretty good about Calvin Ridley. He projects as a back-end wide receiver 2, but he's got wide receiver 1 upside. Tony Pollard, Spears is likely back. He's actually still questionable. We haven't got an official report that Spears is going to play, but he got through practice in a way that we expect Spears to play through and get cleared from the concussion protocol today. So it does sound like Spears will be active. That is pretty bad for Tony Pollard for fantasy. Last time we saw Spears active, he played 44% of the snaps. He saw only 15% of the carries, though. He had a 10% target share. But he's going to steal targets away from Pollard for sure. He's going to steal snaps away from Pollard for sure. There's also a decent amount of plays that are out there together. Pollard played 47% of the snaps in that game. He was under 50% though snap share Tony Pollard in each of Spears' last 2 games. They don't want this massive workload on Pollard at this point in the season for the Titans. And him and Spears, were supposed to be this 1A, 1B situation this season. Spears has missed a bunch of time, but that definitely does impact Pollard. Pollard's still a borderline must start, though, in this spot. He's still going to lead this backfield in touches. This game is likely going to be a pass game environment for the Titans. We saw Saquon. Obviously, that's Saquon. He scored 34 points a couple weeks ago. Rico Dowdle, he had 86 rushing yards and 3 catches last week. The Commanders have allowed the 10th fewest points per game to running backs, but they've allowed the 6th most yards and the 13th most touchdowns. And yeah, their yards per carry has been, terrible. They've been one of the least efficient run defenses. 5 yards per carry allowed to running backs this season. 88% catch rate allowed to running backs this season. That's 3rd worst and 2nd worst, respectively. So you got to have some confidence in the efficiency from both Pollard and Spears today. You could do much worse than Pollard. Nick Westbrook-Ikhine is worth mentioning quickly as well. All this guy does is score touchdowns. He's had 6 touchdowns in his last 7 games. Amon-Ra St. Brown type numbers here from Nick Westbrook-Ikhine. His touchdown rate is 35%. That's a real number. 35%. Over a third of Nick Westbrook-Ikhine's catches this season have been touchdowns. Truly incredible. Wild stuff. He's scoring every week. At some point, it's not an outlier at some point for Nick Westbrook-Ikhine. Obviously not a great option to start, but all this guy does is score touchdowns. So yeah, I want to start Ridley. I think Pollard's still an okay start. Will Levis is starting to play a bit better. He's off the fantasy radar, I'd say, in this game, but 3 straight games over 16 points. Both him and Bryce Young seem to be taking a bit of a step forward down the stretch of this season. All right, that's the Titans. I think the Commanders have a good chance to beat the Titans in this game and cover the spread as well. They're 6-point favorites at home. All right, let's get to the Cardinals and Vikings game. Again, we're going to talk about this 49ers-Bills game. Let's talk about the tight end ranks. Seeing a bunch of people ask about the tight end ranks. I think the tight end tiers and ranks are really straightforward this week, honestly. You want to start Taysom unless you have Kittle and McBride. Among the tight ends left, of course. Let's talk about McBride, though, because the Cardinals are 3-point underdogs in Minnesota today. They have been really bad over the last few weeks. Kyler had a good game back in week 10. Horrible game, though, after the bye. Last week, only 11 fantasy points. He had 285 passing yards, but he only had 9 rushing yards and no touchdowns. For the Cardinals last week, Marvin Harrison Jr. was a big disappointment last week. I expect him to bounce back. He's right outside the top 12 wide receivers left. I'm starting Marvin Harrison Jr. in most leagues this week. He only had 7.7 last week, 3 catches for 47 yards, but he still played 95% of the snaps. That was a season high, career high snap percentage for Marvin Harrison Jr. last week. He was not coming off the field, and he still had an 18% target share. He's had at least an 18% target share in every single healthy game this season, outside of week 1. I think the floor for Marvin Harrison Jr. is a bit underrated right now, and the ceiling is absolutely underrated. We have not seen him go over 20 points since week 8, but I think this is going to be a big spot for Marv. And we just saw against this Vikings defense, we just saw DJ Moore and Keenan Allen both go over 23 fantasy points. I think Marvin Harrison Jr. is likely going over 23 fantasy points today. I have a lot of confidence in his ceiling in this one. I think Kyler Murray, this is a pretty good bounce back spot for him. But Trey McBride, man, he's tight end 1. There's not many guys that are more fun to watch right now in the NFL than Trey McBride. Let me hop over to the QBs. I got you. The Trey McBride, he's right up there with Brock Bowers for tight end 1 right now. He had 12 catches for 133 yards last week. Somehow he has still not scored a receiving touchdown this season. He's got the 3rd most catches. He's averaging 6 catches and a nice 69 yards per game in the air for Trey McBride. 0 receiving touchdowns. Truly wild. He leads all tight ends in target share. He leads all tight ends in air yards. 28% target share, 58 air yards per game. He had 90 air yards last week and 44% of the Cardinals targets. He absolutely has to be started. He is the tight end 1 with Bowers and Kelsey having already played. I think we had McBride as tight end 2 behind Bowers before the week started. But yeah, I'm starting Marvin Harrison Jr. I'm starting Trey McBride. And James Conner, he just got a contract extension. Not great for Trey Benson for next year for fantasy, for dynasty. It seems like James Conner is going to be the lead back again next year, assuming he stays healthy. He's coming off one of his worst games of the season. Only 8 rushing yards last week on 7 carries. I mean, he gets 1.1 yards per carry and then gets a contract extension. He had 5 catches for 41 at least, which saved his fantasy day. And he's going to have a huge workload again. He played 69% of the snaps. Last week, he'll probably be around 70% of the snaps again. This week, not a great matchup versus the Vikings for him, which is why he projects his running back 18. I would start him over Brian Robinson Jr. I think that one's pretty close. Michael Wilson, also an interesting sleeper in this game. He does match up pretty well here versus the Vikings defense. He's, the deep threat for the Cardinals. He played 82% of snaps last week, only a 12% target share. He had 4 targets, but he had a huge percentage of the team's air yards, 30% of the air yards. Definitely a chance for Michael Wilson to make a big play in this game. Trey Benson, I still think is worth stashing in case James Conner misses time, but he's absolutely not startable right now. All right, so that's the Cardinals. I think the Cardinals have a good chance to upset the Vikings in this game. I'm a little bit surprised they're 3-point underdogs versus the Vikings. It's mostly just because the Vikings, though, are at home. I don't really care too much about that, but this game's in a dome, at least, unlike some of these cold weather games. Today, we're going to get to the weather here coming up momentarily, by the way. We're going game by game. We're going to get to every single player in every single game, every single relevant fantasy player in every single game. That we're going to get to the free player props. Got a DraftKings lineup for you guys today as well. I feel good about it. We did cash the Thanksgiving DraftKings lineup. The Caleb Williams DJ stack worked out pretty well for us. We are, I think, on a 2-for-2 streak so far in the last 2 DraftKings lineups. So I feel pretty good about the DK lineup. We got 3 free player props I like as well today. But onto the Vikings side of the ball. Justin Jefferson has been a bit disappointing in his last 3 games. He's under 15 points in his last 3 games. You got to expect he turns it around sooner rather than later. And why not this week versus the Arizona Cardinals? The Cardinals defense has been a bit inconsistent, a bit volatile this season. At times they played great. At times they've been absolutely crushed. They've been okay versus receivers this season, allowing 30 points per game to wide receivers. This season, they've allowed, though, 11.5 catches. That ranks in the bottom half of the league. Last week, we did see a JSN pop off, 6 for 77 and a touchdown. Metcalf had 4 catches for 59 yards. I think we see at least a JSN type game here from Justin Jefferson. We actually haven't seen a wide receiver go over 20 points versus the Arizona Cardinals since week 5. Brandon Ayuk the Bazooka before his injury. So maybe this isn't the game. We see a big Justin Jefferson bounce back. Regardless, you're starting him for fantasy. Aaron Jones, one of the better running back options left this week. He's playing a massive role right now for the Vikings. This is the biggest role we've ever seen Aaron Jones in. 79% snap share in week 12. That was back up to over 75% like we had been seeing prior to week 10 and week 11. He had 82% of the running back carries, a 12.5% target share. I mean, just a massive role for Aaron Jones right now, and a pretty good matchup here versus the Cardinals. He absolutely has to be started. I think he is a pretty underrated fantasy option right now. Sam Darnold has been over 20 points in back-to-back games. I don't really want to start him in this spot versus the Cardinals, though. He does have 2 touchdowns back-to-back games. He went for 330 and 2 TDs versus a pretty good Bears defense. I'm not very excited about him in this spot, though, versus the Cardinals. I expect him to lean a little bit more on Aaron Jones. He's maybe startable in certain spots. He ranks as QB 14. I got the QB ranks up behind me on the TikTok live. I think I got them up on the YouTube live as well. Yeah, I do. Sam Darnold ranks as QB 14. The QB's left. I think Sam Darnold versus Jameis Winston. Yeah, I'd go Darnold there. I'd play him over Russ and Drake May, but I'm not playing him over Purdy, who has a lot of risk this week. I prefer to bench Purdy, but I think I'd still play him over Darnold. We're going to get to the weather in that game, of course. Stafford, I'd play over both those guys. Anthony Richardson, I'm easily playing over Sam Darnold. And then TJ Hawkinson, he projects as a top 4 tight end left. He had 7 catches, 114, and we talked about it on this live stream last week. None of us were surprised by TJ Hawkinson last week if you tuned into the live. Josh Oliver was out. It was very similar to the Mark Andrews, Isaiah Likely situation from a few weeks ago, where we went into last week knowing we were getting a season-high snap percentage from TJ Hawkinson. I actually thought it was going to be even higher than this. I thought it was going to be in the 75% plus range. He still has room to grow in his snap percentage, which is very encouraging. But he did run a route on 80% of the dropbacks last week. That was by far a season high. He saw a season-high target share as a result, 28% target share, 9 targets, 96 air yards for him, and he produced 7 catches, 114. Still has not scored a touchdown yet this season. You got to think that comes soon. But yeah, Hawkinson's definitely a pretty good tight end option. I would still play Taysom Hill over TJ Hawkinson. That one's pretty close, but the ceiling for Taysom, guys, we've already seen the best Taysom game of the season. He's not going to score 3 touchdowns to go over 100 yards again. And I mean, his last game was crazy, guys. 42.5 points. He had 10 catches. We're not in the Saints game yet, but I'm already jumping to Taysom Hill. I'm excited about Taysom. Again, let me go back to the tight end ranks here as I talk through some of these tight end decisions. All right, so that's the Vikings Cardinals game. I think the Cardinals win this game. I know they've been pretty bad over the past month, but this feels like a get right spot for Kyler, for Marvin Harrison Jr. as well. And I'm still a little bit uncertain about Sam Darnold. And the Cardinals defense is a pretty volatile one. I think they could show up any given week. All right, let's go to the Steelers Bengals game. This is another one of the cold games that I just don't care about the cold weather really at all. The Steelers are coming off a really close, tough loss on Thursday Night Football versus the Browns in that snow game. Russ did not do amazing in that game. Still 278 passing yards, though, in the snow. George Pickens, he's a must start for sure against the Bengals. His prop line's over 70 yards today. I mean, he could even be higher in the ranks, I think, than wide receiver 10. I mean, he's coming off a down game. He actually should have had a bigger game in the snow. He almost scored a long touchdown in that game. Unfortunately, he was fighting on the last play of the game. He's the only Steelers player that realistically is going to catch a Hail Mary, and he's off on the sideline fighting. I mean, that was a rough end for Pickens, who at times has not shown the best decision-making, but he's definitely a top 10 wide receiver left this week. You got to be starting George Pickens. Najee Harris, I think, is a bit underrated right now as well. There's at least a floor for Najee in terms of the volume. He had his worst game over the last couple of months last week in the snow. Jaylen Warren looked much better than him last game. He only played 39% of the snaps, too. That was a season low for Najee Harris, but he still had 16 carries. I mean, he's going to get at least 16 touches. He's had at least 16 opportunities every single game this season. He has not been under 16 total carries plus targets once this season. I mean, it's really hard to find that in the NFL these days. I still think Najee Harris is a pretty good floor option. We've only seen him go over 20 points once this season. He really does lack sort of the big play and explosiveness you want for a ceiling for fantasy, but the floor is really about as good as it gets. I mean, he's going to get 16 opportunities, guys, in this game, at least 14 carries, at least 2 targets in this game, like we've seen every single game this season. He doesn't really have a good matchup left, and this is a pretty scary schedule for the Steelers running backs here rest of the season, but the workload should be there. And the Bengals are allowing a lot of touchdowns, a touchdown per game allowed to running backs. Najee's got a pretty good chance at a TD. Jaylen Warren is an interesting option this week, too. Let me hop over to the running back ranks here as I talk through this. Jaylen Warren, he still ranks a bit behind Najee Harris, even though he was much better last week. He scored 15.4 points last week. By far his best game of the season. It was his only game over 11 fantasy points. He had a rushing touchdown. He also had 3 catches. He played more snaps than Najee Harris. And he was the primary receiving back. He had a 19% target share. Again, this was a snow game, a bit different of a game environment. But he's had at least 9.5 points now in 3 straight. He hadn't been over 9 points a single time before that this season, before the bye. He seems to be fully healthy now for the first time. He's definitely startable. And it won't be surprising any given week if he outscores Najee on less volume but more efficiency. Please don't start Pat Freiermuth. He has been out-targeted by Darnell Washington since Russell Wilson took over. He is not startable. Calvin Austin, I've seen getting some steam out there as a sleeper. I'd rather avoid Calvin Austin. I mean, he's a bit of a gadget guy. He played only 58% of snaps. Last week, he only had 11.5% target share. He's only 5 targets over his last 2 games. He's just happened to catch 1 big touchdown last week. That's what you're getting with Calvin Austin. I mean, kind of like an Alec Pierce type option where you got to hope for 1 big play, and he's capable of it. We've seen it. But he's also has a floor of 0 points. I mean, 0 points is the Calvin Austin floor. So I'd prefer not to start Calvin Austin. Any given week, too, Mike Williams' role could increase. Van Jefferson Jr., I still think, is playing ahead of him as well. And obviously, Pickens is going to dominate the targets on this offense. Good morning, Sam. Happy football. Happy football to you as well. It is the best day of the week. We are about halfway through talking through the games. Then we're going to go through the free player prop, the DraftKings lineup. We got a weather report coming up when we get to the 49ers Bills game. The quick TLDR, if you're not going to make it till then, I'm not worried. I'm really not that worried about the weather. And this is usually like my take on the weather. I'm not going to overreact unless there's significant wind. I'm really not going to overreact unless there's extreme weather or significant wind. I really don't care. I don't care about the cold. I really don't. I think people overreact to the cold a lot. I think people were overreacting on the Dolphins game, and people are going to overreact to this Bills 49ers game weather too. But we'll get to that here in a second. So that's the Steelers side of the Steelers-Bengals game. I think the Bengals likely win this one. They're 3-point favorites versus the Steelers here at home. The Bengals offense has been amazing this season. And even in this tough matchup versus the Steelers, all these guys are really must starts. Jamar Chase has to be started. You have to start Chase. You have to start Joe Burrow. 2. I mean, he ranks as QB 4. There's only 3 QBs I'm playing over Joe Burrow. It's Hurts, Lamar, and Allen, the 3 rushing QBs. I'm playing him over Herbert, over Baker Mayfield, over Stroud, over Kyler Murray, some of these other QBs I like, over Jaden Daniels. I mean, Joe Burrow has to be started. We haven't really seen a bad game from Burrow over the last month. He's been over at least 29 fantasy points, guys, in 3 straight games. And I get these were better matchups than he gets today versus the Steelers. He got the Raiders, Ravens, and Chargers in those 3. But I really don't see any defense stopping the Bengals offense right now. I do not think the Steelers defense stops the Bengals offense to some extent, at least today. Chase Brown is top 5 running back option. He is in one of the best roles in the NFL right now. You could make an argument he's in the best role. I think Kyren Williams, is in the conversation. Some of these other top end running backs, Joe Mixon, CMC, still probably in the conversation as well, Achane. But Chase Brown's right in that conversation, guys. He's got, 19 catches in his last 3 games. I mean, these are wide receiver numbers. He's playing over 85% of the snaps. He had 83% of the snaps last week. He's getting almost all of the running back carries. I think he's at 100% running back rush share over the last 3 weeks, over 80% of the team's rushes over the last 3 weeks, over 13% target share in 3 straight games. I mean, the role's amazing right now for Chase Brown. Not the best matchup for him, but he's a must start for sure. And then T. Higgins, I expect to see a bunch of T. Higgins questions today. You kind of have to start T. Higgins, guys. You kind of have to. I mean, he's similar to Joe Mixon and A.J. Brown in a lot of ways, where we really haven't seen like a bad T. Higgins game this season, really since week 4. And it doesn't matter the matchup for T, I don't think. 9 catches, 148, and a touchdown he had versus the Chargers. He's had at least 14.5 points in his last 4 games. We've seen multiple games over 25 points this season. It's not an easy matchup here versus the Steelers for T. Higgins or Jamar Chase, but they both have a massive ceiling in this game. You got to think at least one of them finishes as the top 10 wide receiver every single week, and they both project here still top 10, at least among the receivers left. T. Higgins or Jonathan Taylor in PPR. Yeah, it's T. Higgins. You got to go T. Higgins. The ceiling is way higher, I think, for Higgins. I like JT versus the Pats too, but with A-Rich playing, he's not catching many passes. He's losing some of the touchdown ceiling. I think I would go T. Higgins over JT. All right, that's the Bengals side. Again, I think the Bengals probably cover the spread here and beat their line as 3-point favorites. A lot of very close spreads this week. We haven't seen this in most weeks this season. And I feel like every Sunday live, it's like we're looking at 10-point spreads, 12-point spreads, and 9-point spreads. So far in the games we talked about, all these games are under 6-point spreads, other than the Commanders-Titans game. The Jags are 3.5-point underdogs at home versus the Texans. I think the Texans cover there. The Pats are 2.5-point underdogs versus the Colts. I think the Colts cover there. The Titans are the 6-point underdogs versus the Commanders. That's the biggest spread we've discussed. The Cardinals only 3-point underdogs versus the Vikings. The Bengals only 3-point favorites versus the Steelers. And these next 2 games, these are 2 1-point spreads we're about to get to. The Jets, 1-point favorites versus the Seahawks. Man, every week it feels like the Jets are favored. And every week it feels like that was a mistake looking back. And this is probably another one of those weeks. Let's pull up the Jets here. And I feel like the Jets offense right now is one of the most difficult to try to project. So Breece Hall coming into this game questionable. He's going to play through a knee injury that he played through last week, but definitely something to watch here. I mean, how much are they going to push Breece? Breece is actually coming off his best game of the season, where apparently he suffered this knee injury. He actually played one of his high snap shares of the season, despite playing through the knee injury. You got to wonder how much or if they throttle Breece Hall's workload back, though, with him being questionable with this knee injury and them having Braylon Allen, who's also been effective this season. I mean, he's coming off his best game of the season, Breece Hall. He had 7 catches, 2 touchdowns. He had over 120 total yards in that game against the Colts. A little bit more of a difficult matchup here versus the Seattle Seahawks. Breece Hall, though, you have to start him. I mean, if you have him, you have to start him. But definitely something to watch closely. We have not seen a running back over 15 points since week 8 versus the Seattle Seahawks. The Seahawks defense is really turning the corner over the last month. I mean, they actually have become one of the better defenses in the NFL, like pretty much since their bye week, even the week before that against the Rams. So Kyren Williams, Christian McCaffrey, and James Conner all went under 15 points versus the Seahawks, and Breece dealing with a knee injury. I mean, wouldn't be surprising to see Breece disappoint a bit in this one. I mean, very weird situation here for Aaron Rodgers and the whole passing attack. It's already come out that Aaron Rodgers is gone really after this season. It sounds like he's second guessing that a bit and maybe wants to stay because, I mean, who's going to take Aaron Rodgers? I think that's a real question. It is a very real possibility, guys. This is the last season for Aaron Rodgers. If you just think about what teams are really going to want to take in Aaron Rodgers after what's played out for the Jets, after the type of control, decision-making control Aaron Rodgers wants, I mean, there might be none. There might be no teams that are willing to take that risk. Devontae Adams just, got traded to the Jets. I mean, the whole offense, we know, was built around Rodgers. Very interesting situation there. Obviously, the GM, the coach have been fired for the Jets already this season. But Garrett Wilson, Devontae Adams, I mean, they're still pretty much must starts in fantasy. And I think Devontae Adams actually projects better in the props than Garrett Wilson. His prop lines, I think, were around 60. Garrett Wilson around the low 50s. One of those two are going to smash. We've seen at least 6 catches from Adams the last 3. This is exactly what I was concerned about when the Adams trade happened. And now it's coming to fruition to some extent. Both these guys probably need to be started, though, despite the Seahawks defense playing a bit better. Let's look at how they've done versus receivers over the last month or so. In their last 2 games, they've been very strong. Juwan Jennings had 25 points. Demarcus Robinson and Cooper Kupp, they went over 20 points each a couple weeks before that. Last week, the Cardinals receivers did absolutely nothing. Under 10 points, all of them. Big disappointing game for Marvin Harrison Jr. It was really Trey McBride that stepped up for the Cardinals last week. But yeah, Garrett Wilson and Devontae Adams still borderline must starts. I actually might play Adams over Garrett Wilson, though, partially because of those prop lines. That's pretty much it for the Jets. I think they lose this game. They're 1-point favorites at home. Like, it wouldn't be shocking for this to be the last Aaron Rodgers game, especially with how the Seahawks defense is playing. And we might see it all fall apart. For the Jets today, it's already kind of falling apart. All right, the Chargers and the Falcons. Let's go to that game next. This is another 1-point spread. This time, the road team is the team favored by 1. The Chargers favored by 1 in Atlanta. Let's start with the Chargers side of the ball because, man, I'm excited about this Chargers offense right now. So there's no J.K. Dobbins. J.K. Dobbins actually went on IR. I mean, tough stuff for J.K. With a second he hurt his knee in that game, you had to be concerned with his injury history, and the Chargers are going to be playing it safe. They put him on IR. He's going to be out pretty much the rest of the fantasy season. That's pretty big for Gus Edwards, and it's definitely intriguing for Kamani Vidal, who I think is pretty clearly better than Gus Edwards. I mean, Gus Edwards has not been good, guys, this season. He really has not been efficient at all. 3.3 yards per carry for Gus Edwards. That ranks 60th in the NFL. He was at 1.2 yards per carry last week versus the Ravens, his least efficient game of the season. He's at 2 yards per reception. He only has 1 catch this whole season. So he's absolutely no receiving role. He's been inefficient on the ground. Bless you. Thank you. So I want nothing to do with Gus Edwards. I'd rather bench Gus Edwards if I could, but the role should be better for Gus Edwards with J.K. Dobbins out. Like, he is going to be the lead back, at least to start. And then Hassan Haskins, he's been playing ahead of Kamani Vidal. Kamani Vidal wasn't even active last game. So that's something to watch too. Who's their RB2 in this offense? Because the RB2 will get work, and it's possible we see Haskins and Vidal split that role. But man, Vidal looked good when he's gotten opportunities this season. He's at not a good yards per carry number, 2.4 yards per carry. But man, he's been good in the receiving game. He's got 100% of his targets, 16.3 yards per reception. He really hasn't played a lot. These are all really low volume, small sample size numbers. He hasn't had a game with more than 6 carries. But there's definitely some intrigue there with Vidal. I think he's probably better than Gus Edwards. And Hassan Haskins might be too. Gus Edwards feels a little bit cooked, and he has no receiving role, like, at all. So not the type of guy I want to be starting in PPR leagues. Ladd McConkey, though, he's a top 10 wide receiver. You got to be starting Ladd. I mean, there's no way around benching Ladd. Like, you can't bench Ladd McConkey right now. He's got at least 5 catches in 5 of his last 6 games. He played 85% of the snaps last week. He was questionable all week last week with a shoulder injury. Has the second most snaps share of the season. Had the second highest route participation of the season, second most routes of his career. He only had a 17% target share last week, and he still had 6 for 83, still scored 14.3 points. He's clearly the best receiver already for the Chargers. Quentin Johnson was really, really rough with the drops last week. Several brutal drops for Quentin Johnson. I still think his role stays about the same. But yeah, Ladd McConkey, his prop lines are at 65.5 this week. I mean, it's hard to find receivers with prop lines over that. We got him projected as top 10 wide receiver in the Walter Pick step. So we're starting Ladd. Disley, he's an interesting. He got cleared I think he was dealing with, groin injury. He's cleared for this game. I think Hayden Hurst is still out. I think he maybe even went on IR. We saw actually a season-high snap percentage for Will Dissly in the last game. I also have some confidence this Chargers offense is going to skew more pass-heavy without J.K. Dobbins. I do not think they're going to be able to lean on the run as much as they have this season without Dobbins in the lineup. I think that's good for Herbert, for McConkey, for Dissly, even for Josh Palmer. It's not good for Gus Edwards. And maybe Quentin Johnson is an interesting sleeper coming off the drop game. Maybe they try to get him a bounce back spot here. It's not a bad matchup here versus the Falcons. We've actually seen QBs crush the Falcons in their last few games. Let me pull this up here. We've seen Bo Nix. He had 28.8 points. He had 307 passing yards and 4 TDs in this last game versus the Atlanta Falcons. Falcons coming off the bye here. And then Derek Carr. He threw for 269 and 2 touchdowns. Scored over 20 points. He was a top 6 quarterback in week 10. And then in week 9, this is the week that Dak Prescott got hurt. Dak and Cooper Rush, they combined for over 23 fantasy points. They combined for over 248 passing yards and 2 TDs. And then Baker Mayfield, the week before that, he went for 330 and 3. So we've seen 4 straight games where the quarterback is throwing for over 245 passing yards and at least 2 touchdowns. That's what Herbert's stepping into in a game that I think they're going to be even more pass heavy without J.K. Dobbins. I mean, sign me up, man, for Justin Herbert. I've said this, multiple times over the last few weeks, but there's really not many quarterbacks I want in fantasy more than Herbert right now. He had a bit of a disappointing game last week versus the Ravens, only 17.6, but that's the floor, man, for Herbert. That's been his floor over the last 5 games. And he got another great matchup here versus the Falcons. Then he gets the Chiefs in a game that should be close. And then he gets the Bucs to start the fantasy playoffs. A scary matchup there in week 16. But yeah, Herbert is a fantastic QB option right now. The Falcons are allowing the 4th most passing touchdowns per game to quarterbacks this season. Both QB ranks here again. We're going to get to start sits here, guys, coming up momentarily. Hop back over to wide receiver ranks. See if there's any. Yeah, Vele or Dissly. Let's get to this one quick as we're on this Chargers game. I've seen a couple of Vele questions already. It's probably Vele. I think it's probably Vele. Let's see. Wow, Dissly projects a bit better here than Vele. I think it's Dissly. Vele's been pretty good the last couple of games. It's been over 10 points in 3 straight games. Snap share is not great. Target share has been there. Dissly's snap share is better, though, and the target share is just as good. I think it's Dissly. Again, I think the Chargers do lean more pass-heavy, too. This week, so yeah, I would play Dissly over Vele. I'm playing Taysom over Ertz like so easily. Let's see if that's the next game here. So I think the Chargers do beat the Falcons in this one. Oh, we haven't talked about the Falcon side of this game, though. Again, the Chargers are only 1-point favorites here. Bijan Robinson, obviously a must start. Drake London, a must start in this spot versus the Chargers. The Chargers defense has been good, but we've seen them slow down a bit over the last month. Really not the scariest defense in the NFL. And we've seen some big wide receiver games from the elite receivers. Jamar Chase and T. Higgins both went over 25 points, both went over 26 versus the Chargers a few weeks back. We saw Zay and Rashad Bateman to a lesser extent succeed last week. Both went over 11 points. So not a bad floor here for London. Kirk Cousins is really not on the radar for fantasy, though, with absolutely no mobility. Darnell Mooney is definitely startable this week. I would start guys like Jerry Jeudy, Garrett Wilson, Marvin Harrison Jr., Brian Thomas, Ladd McConkey over Darnell Mooney. But I'm starting Mooney over Khalil Shakir. I'm starting Mooney over Tank Dell, over Debo. A guy like Elijah Moore, I would start Mooney over. I think Mooney versus Pittman's close. I'd probably lean Mooney there. Mooney versus Ridley is close. I honestly think I'd probably lean Ridley over Mooney. Definitely some tough start sits with Mooney. He's coming off his worst game of the season since week 1. But that was against the Denver Broncos. He's been really consistent outside of that. He only played 58% of snaps. I think he got hurt in that game, if I recall. Yeah, he did. He hurt his hamstring, but he will play this week. So you kind of have to throw that game out the window. Kyle Pitts, not really a tight end you feel great starting. He's coming off a 2-point game versus the Broncos. I do wonder if they try to get him a little bit more involved off the bye, but he's been incredibly inconsistent. He's been under 2.5 points now in 2 of his last 3 games. He's been under 10 in 3 straight games. He only had 1 catch in 2 of those 3 games. He did play 75% of the snaps again before the bye. He probably is around 75% of the snaps here versus the Chargers. The Chargers are allowing the 6th most catches to tight ends this season. Mark Andrews had a decent game last game versus the Chargers. So an interesting ceiling for Pitts, but a really scary floor a very scary floor. We're not starting Taysom over McConkey. We're going McConkey over Taysom, guys. All right, that's the Falcons and Chargers game. Again, I think the Chargers win this one, but it's projected to be very close. All right, this is the next biggest spread of the day here between the Buccaneers and the Panthers. The Panthers getting a little bit more respect, and rightfully so here. They're 6.5-point underdogs. That's it. Versus the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, less than a touchdown underdog. Versus the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who have had a really good offense this season. Baker Mayfield ranks 4th in QB fantasy points per game this year. Let me hop over to the QB ranks again here. Oh, been on the QB ranks for a while. I'll hop over to the wide receiver ranks. Again, we're going to get to the start sits, guys, in the live streams. I shout out to everyone in the comments. Shout out to everybody in the live stream right now. Guys, I appreciate you all so much. Look forward to these lives all week. And we're over halfway through talking through the games. We're going to get to the start sits, the player props, and the DraftKings lineup soon. We only got a few more games left. We got the Bucs game. We got the Rams Saints coming up. Then the Eagles, Ravens, 49ers, Bills. Really fun late window today. We're on to the late window, actually. There's only 3 late window games. This is one of them. The Buccaneers versus the Carolina Panthers. Baker Mayfield is a must start, really, this week. I mean, there's very few QBs I'm starting over Baker. I'm starting Herbert, Burrow, Allen, Lamar, and Hurts. That's it. I'm starting Baker over Stroud. I'm starting Baker over Kyler, over Jaden Daniels, over Bo Nix, over Anthony Richardson. I mean, the floor is really good here for Baker. He's been at least 18 points every single game but one since week 3. Again, he's averaging the 4th most points per game this season. He's averaging 255 yards and over 2 touchdowns a game. Though both those numbers rank top 10 in the NFL. He's got the 3rd best completion percentage in the league this year at 71.4%. And the Panthers are not a scary matchup here. Pat Mahomes, he just had his best game this season versus the Panthers last week. We saw Bo Nix pop off versus them a couple weeks back too. We've seen 2 QBs in half their last 4 games. 2 of the last 4 games go over 28 points. Baker could go over 28 points in this game. Would not be shocking. We've seen him do that multiple times this season. 3 different times. 4 different times this season. Several of those games were in tougher matchups than this Panthers matchup, especially if the Panthers keep this game close. And it is projected to be pretty close here. Again, this is only a 6.5-point spread. Mike Evans is a must start. Mike Evans, guys, is still in the running. We'll go back over to the wide receiver ranks. Still in the running to hit this 1,000-yard mark. He needs to average more than 100 receiving yards per game. He fell just under what he needed to get in week 12 to stay on pace. But he could go over 100 yards easily in this game and get right back on track. He projects as a top 10 wide receiver option this week. There's very few receivers I'm playing over Mike Evans. Ladd McConkey is the end of the list. Ladd, Cooper Kupp, Jefferson, Puka, Jamar Chase, Nico, and AJ Brown. Like, that's it. I'm playing Evans over T. Higgins, who I like a lot. Still, I'm playing him over George Pickens, who I like a lot. I'm playing Mike Evans over Drake London. I'm playing Mike Evans over Brian Thomas Jr. and Marvin Harrison Jr., who I like a lot this week as well. And then Bucky Irving, man. I don't know how you bench Bucky Irving. After last week, he scored 27 fantasy points. He had 6 catches for 64 yards and 88 rushing yards for a touchdown. He only played 52% of snaps, but he actually outsnapped Rachaad White, I think, for the first time this season. He out-targeted him as well. I think they had maybe the same amount of carries. Bucky was at 12 carries. Rachaad White, he played less snaps. Yeah, he only had 12 carries too. So they had the same amount of carries. Bucky did way better. He played more snaps, and he had a way better receiving role. Only 1 catch for Rachaad White. I mean, the tides are shifting here a bit because before it was, Bucky clearly the more efficient early down back, probably the guy more likely to score, but it was Rachaad White in that receiving role we saw from week 7 to week 10, and Bucky's maybe taking that receiving role right from Rachaad White. Both guys good options this week, but you're starting Bucky pretty easily over Rachaad White. We got Bucky Irving projected ahead of Breece Hall this week. We talked about that Seahawks defense. No running back really has done good versus that Seahawks defense, including several good running backs. Kyron Williams, James Conner were on that list. So Bucky over Breece Hall. Not playing Bucky over Kyron Williams, though, or JT, or Kenneth Walker, or Aaron Jones, or Christian McCaffrey, or Derrick Henry, or Chase Brown, or Bijan. I'm not playing over these guys. Saquon, obviously Kamara in Mixon. But then it's Bucky. I'm playing Bucky over Breece, over Chuba Hubbard, over James Cook, over Najee Harris, over Tony Pollard, over James Conner. Bucky Irving firmly in tier 3, the top of tier 3, ahead of Breece Hall this week. So you got to feel very good about Bucky in this matchup. The Panthers have been the second best matchup for running backs this season. They've been the best matchup for tight ends. Now, Cade Otton definitely well on the fantasy radar this week. He's been a bit disappointing in the last couple of games. He actually only had 1 catch last week versus the Giants, 1 catch for 30 yards. He still played over 80% of snaps, though. He still had a 10% target share. That was his worst this season since week 1. I think it's a good bounce back spot here, though, for K. Dotton. Obviously, Mike Evans is back. Bucky Irving was very involved. But I think K. Dotton gets back on track. You're still a top 10 tight end option. I'd still start him over Kyle Pitts pretty easily. For example, Evans versus Bucky, that's an interesting one. I think Evans probably is the option there over Bucky. Let's see here. Yeah, Evans is a slightly better option, a much higher ceiling for Evans, but a much safer floor for Bucky. I mean, this is a true floor ceiling decision. If we look at the graph here, I mean, it's pretty close. Bucky had a 12% bust percentage, but Evans at 28%. But Evans has a 21% chance to go over 25 points. Bucky's odds there are 6%. Where's Achan? This is just the rest of the week rankings here. So if you've already played, you're not on these rankings. Carlos, good morning to you as well. Shout out to everybody, guys, in this live right now. We will get to the start sits here in a second. When are you doing start sits, Trev? I'm doing start sits in about 20 minutes or so. We're like 20 minutes away from the start sit portion of the live. We're going game by game right now. Right now we're on the Bucs Panthers game. So we just talked through the Buccaneers side of the ball. So we're starting pretty much all these guys. I mean, starting Baker Mayfield, you're starting Mike Evans, you're starting Bucky Irving. I think Rachaad White's a decent start still too. He's not a must start like these other guys. And then K. Dotton is also a really good start. A really good start. This live is my version of NFL's college game day. Thanks, man. I love that. Appreciate that. I look forward to these lives, man, all week. A lot to talk through, of course. All right, so let's get to the Panthers side of the ball, though, now. So the Buccaneers defense also, they projected the 5th best defense, but the Panthers offense is also starting to turn a corner. Bryce Young is starting to turn the corner. And all those people that were bashing the Panthers for benching Bryce Young, where are they now? It seems like that benching actually has worked out pretty well. You know, from a fantasy perspective, we're not starting Bryce Young. He actually projects as the worst quarterback for fantasy this week. He's literally dead last of the quarterbacks left. So we're not starting him for fantasy, but for real life, you got to be a little excited from what we've seen from Bryce Young. He had 7.5 yards per attempt and 60% completion percentage last week versus the Chiefs. The Panthers almost beat the Chiefs in that game. That was a close game. It's part of the reason they're only 6.5-point underdogs here versus the Bucs. 290 air yards for him. He's finally pushing the ball down the field. It's actually his best quarterback rating of the season last week. 93 quarterback rating. His best of the season. I mean, he still has a long ways to go, and I think he's got to put a couple of these games in a row to have, more confidence going forward. But he's coming off his best fantasy game of the season, his best quarterback rating of the season, his most passing yards of the season, all versus the Kansas City Chiefs. And now he gets the Bucs. I mean, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers have been the second best matchup for quarterbacks all year. They're allowing 22.6 points per game. I mean, Tommy DeVito went over 10 points last week. I mean, there's really that was the worst quarterback performance we've seen. Even Spencer Rattler did better than Tommy DeVito. He had 14.4 versus this Bucs secondary. But the 3 games before that, Kirk Cousins, Pat Mahomes, Brock Purdy, all went over 23 fantasy points. All were top 5 QB options. Bryce Young, maybe a sneaky game here for him to keep it going and maybe get his first game over 20 points. Walter, what defense should I use? Yeah, so my name's Sam. Classic mistake. Do not worry about it. Walter is the AI model I helped build, which powers the Walter Picks app, a free app that you should download. It's in the TikTok bio. It's in the YouTube description. It's going to help you a ton with fantasy and with props. But I got the defense ranks up for you on the TikTok live for you to look through. All right, so for the Panthers, Chuba Hubbard's still a pretty good start. He projects the top 15 running back. His role has been great. Jonathan Brooks was back last week, and I was pretty excited about it. We were telling everyone, though, to bench Jonathan Brooks last week, and that was obviously a good call. He only had 2 carries. Jonathan Brooks had 2 carries, under 1 fantasy point. It was about as underwhelming of a first game as you could possibly have for Jonathan Brooks, but it wasn't completely underwhelming. He didn't look terrible on his 2 carries. He was only at 3.5 yards per carry on the 2, but if you actually go back and watch the 2 carries, it wasn't terrible. Obviously, a really tough matchup there versus the Chiefs. Last week on the ground, they've been the number 1 defense versus running backs this season. I'm very curious to see how the role grows for Jonathan Brooks or if it stays the same. All season, I've been thinking about Jonathan Brooks as just a fantasy playoff option, and it seems like we might be in a situation where Jonathan Brooks is just a high upside handcuff. The same thing as Trey Benson. The same thing as Braylon Allen, where you need the starter to miss time for him to really hit. It doesn't seem like they're going to push Jonathan Brooks to the limit, which might actually be a long-term good thing for fantasy. Like, part of me wants him to stay under the radar the rest of the season so that he's a smash value pick next year. But Chuba Hubbard's not going anywhere. And clearly they like Chuba Hubbard. He played 89% of snaps last week. In Jonathan Brooks' first game, Chuba Hubbard set a season-high snap percentage. Man. He had 76% of the carries, 15% target share. Hubbard's a pretty good option this week. The Bucs have been a bottom 8 defense versus running backs. And then you look at the wide receivers. So there's no Jalen Coker still. Let me hop back over to the wide receiver ranks. Let's get off the defenses here. There's no Jalen Coker this week. Up over to the running back ranks here on the YouTube Live. We're going to get to the Saints game next. Yeah, that's the next one. So there's no Jalen Coker this week. It's David Moore, Xavier Legette, and Adam Thielen. All these guys project right next to each other. At least one of these guys is going to do well this week versus the Bucs. The Bucs secondary has been very exploitable this season. We talked about their second worst versus quarterbacks this season. They are, ninth worst versus wide receivers this season, 8th worst versus wide receivers this season. David Moore is the sleeper of the group. It was David Moore last week, guys. He had 20 points last week, 6 catches, 81 yards, and a touchdown. He played 94% of the snaps. He had a 30% target share. David Moore, we're talking about here. 29.9 years old. He's almost 30. I mean, he's never been relevant, like his entire career. And suddenly he's in the slot role for the Carolina Panthers. And the Bucs have been crushed by slot receivers. And I think the Bucs are actually without their slot corner in this game. David Moore, very interesting sleeper. He actually projects better than Legette and Thielen, but it's really close. All three of these guys are super, super close. They all project between 9 and 10.2 points. Legette and David Moore project a bit better than Thielen. It was Thielen's first game back last week since week 3, and he played 61% of snaps. That probably grows this week closer to the 70 to 80% range. And he was effective when targeted, but David Moore and Legette played ahead of him. That probably stays the same. I mean, these are the top 3 receivers, though, pretty clearly. Yeah, both David Moore and Legette were over 92% snap percentage last week. The ceiling's a bit higher for Legette and Thielen, but yeah, David Moore is well on the fantasy radar in this game. Again, he went over 30% target share last week versus the Chiefs and had over 20 points. So yeah, we're not starting Jonathan Brooks again. And Jatavion Sanders, he had that neck injury last week. Sounds like he's doing okay. That was a scary one. Tommy Tremble's going to be the starting tight end. He's well off the fantasy radar too. So we're starting Hubbard, and David Moore's an interesting sleeper. Legette, Thielen, one of these 3 receivers will probably do well, and hopefully we see Bryce Young keep it going. I think the Bucs probably cover the 6.5 here, though. A pretty good matchup for their whole offense. I don't think the Bucs offense is stopped in this game. The Panthers do still have one of the worst defenses in the NFL. All right, that's the Bucs Panthers game. No weather to be concerned about in that one. All right, let's go to the Rams and Saints. This is a fun one here between the LA Rams and the New Orleans Saints. Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp are both top 6 wide receivers. Bless you. Thank you. All right, yeah, Puka Nacua and Kupp. Obviously, we're starting both these guys. I mean, Puka Nacua could easily be the wide receiver 1 this week. Would not be surprising. He's got at least 7 catches in at least 95 receiving yards in 3 straight games. He has not been under 18 fantasy points since week 9. And that was the game he got ejected. He's been over 18 points in every non-ejected game since he's been back since week 8. I mean, he's got an incredible floor, an incredible ceiling. The target shares have been there. He's been over 30% target share now in 3 straight games. And it's really not a problem for Cooper Kupp. Because Cooper Kupp's been incredibly consistent too. He's been at least 15 points in all those games since week 8. He's had at least 20 in 3 of his last 4. And the target shares are there for him too. We've seen back-to-back games now where both Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp go over 30% target share. Guys, they're combining for over 2/3 of the team's targets. And this is exactly what we expected heading into the season. Cooper Kupp's up to a 30% target share on the season. That's the 3rd highest rate in the league. And I think Puka Nacua is probably getting dragged down by that one ejected game in terms of the target share. Yeah, he's at 23%, but that's getting dragged down by an injury and an ejection. I mean, he's actually, closer to what Cooper Kupp's target share has been. Kyren Williams, he's been super disappointing over the last month. Big Sam blessing himself has me dying. Bless you, Sam. Thanks, Zach. He's been pretty disappointing over the last month. Under 12 points in 4 straight games for Kyren Williams. I mean, he's become a touchdown-dependent running back on an offense that is skewing more pass-heavy in the red zone now with Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua back in the lineup. I mean, this is a pretty scary situation for Kyren. He's got a really good stretch of games coming up, and the role is still undeniably great. I mean, he clearly leads all running backs in snap share. He's still playing over 80% of the snaps every week. He was at 90% again last week. I mean, we've seen games still this season where he's at over 95% of the snaps. You just don't see that in the NFL today. The carries are still there. He's had at least 15 carries in every single game outside of week 2 this entire season. We've seen 6 straight games now with at least 15 carries out of the bye. It's been 9 straight games with at least 15 carries for Kyren Williams. And you get a matchup versus the Saints. We're projecting him for 20 carries in this game versus the Saints. I mean, he's a good matchup here versus the Saints. I do want to start Kyren this week. I think I saw a question, Kyren Williams for Bucky Irving. Super close one. You know, one of these guys is going to get a lot more volume, and the other one's probably going to be much more efficient. And Bucky's probably going to catch more passes too. He's going to be more efficient and catch more passes, and he also has a good matchup. But I think it's Kyren Williams, man, with this role that he's in. He's got a pretty good chance at touchdown this week too. We're projecting him just under 1 touchdown in this game. But yeah, there's definitely a concerning shift in the role for Kyren Williams. With Puka and Cooper Kupp both back, they are throwing more to the receivers than the running backs now, and they're throwing more in the red zone. So the receiving role has pretty much evaporated for Kyren. He's had 1 catch or fewer in 3 of his last 4 games. Why is Lad projected so much in comparison to ESPN? Because ESPN projections are garbage. They are not good. So part of the whole reason I started Walter Picks was I didn't like the projections I was seeing. I didn't trust them on ESPN or on Yahoo. And the Walter Picks app projections are significantly more accurate than both of those platforms. Actually, both of those platforms, they pay third parties for their projections. But yeah, they're well behind on the Lad projections. I mean, his prop line's at 65.5. I think he goes over 5 catches and 60 yards again today. A really good matchup for Lad this week for sure. Very few receivers I want to start over Lad. Let's switch over to the running back ranks here. All right. So Kyren Williams, I'm starting him over Bucky, but it's super close. They're half a point projection apart. But yeah, we're starting Kyren, starting Kupp, we're starting Puka. Now, Stafford is not a horrible option. He ranks as the last QB1. That's it, though, for this team. I mean, I'm still holding on to Blake Corum in a bunch of leagues, waiting for Kyren to miss time, but it's going to take that. Corum, Jonathan Brooks, Trey Benson, Braylon Allen, these guys are all just the high upside handcuffs at this point. Let's just take a quick peek at the matchup here for Kyren versus the Saints. The Saints are allowing the 5th most points per game to wide receivers this season, or running backs this season, 25 points per game, over a touchdown per game to the running backs. That bodes pretty well for Kyren. He's got about as good of a chance this week as any to score a touchdown. We've seen 3 straight games outside of last week or the week before the bye against the Browns, where the Browns sort of just fell behind in that game, where a running back went for at least 16 points. And if you go back to week 7, week 6, week 5, it gets even better. We've seen a lot of good running back performances versus the Saints this season. So a good right spot here maybe for Kyren Williams. Now on the Saints side of the ball, man, we got to be starting Alvin Kamara, obviously. But Taysom Hill, man, got to be starting him too. Unless you have, let me switch over to the tight end ranks here. Unless you have Trey McBride or George Kittle, I'm starting Taysom. And him versus Hawkinson, I think, is close. We got them projected just 0.2 points apart. I mean, they're in the same tier. The tier 2 is pretty wide this week. I think tier 1's pretty clear. It's McBride. I mean, McBride could be just his own tier 1. Kittle, I think, is sort of the back end tier 1, though, with how good Kittle's been. And then Taysom is the top of tier 2 for me. I'm playing him over Hawkinson, over Njoku, over Ingram, over Otten, over Goddard, over Andrews, and over Henry. But all those guys, to me, are in the same tier. Like, they're all pretty close. They all project within 2 points of each other. But how do we not start Taysom after his last game? 42.5 points. He had 8 catches. This is the thing I think that's getting lost a bit, too, in this last Taysom game, because a lot of his fantasy points came from the ground. He had 138 rushing yards and 3 rushing touchdowns. But it was actually the receiving role, to me, that has me so excited about Taysom this week and moving forward. He had a 35% target share last game, guys. 10 targets. I mean, he was their focal point in the passing game. Remember, this offense is completely depleted. I mean, there's no Chris Olave. There's no Rashid Shaheed. Mason Tipton, Marquez Valdez-Scantling, and Cedric Wilson. These are the top receivers for the Saints. I mean, Taysom is a better weapon on offense than all these guys. And the Saints are starting to realize it. So the target share has a chance to be 20% plus. He's got a chance at, what was this, 7 carries he had? He had a 25% rush share and a 35% target share. I mean, there's just not guys in the NFL that can do this. There's no one else. And you get to play him at tight end. you're getting a running back, tight end, and quarterback that you get to start in your tight end slot. I mean, it really is a cheat code if you really step back and think about it. He's had at least 7 points too in each of his last 3 games. I mean, that's not a bad floor for tight ends. If you're going to get carries, like that gives you a pretty good floor at tight end. And obviously the touchdown upside is massive. And the Rams are not a bad matchup here. Not a bad matchup. They've struggled versus running backs this season. They struggled versus tight ends. This season, we saw Brock Bowers have 10 catches, 93 against them. And Brock Bowers is unbelievable. But yeah, Taysom is a fantastic option again this week. And man, I know we're going to get the Marcus Valdes-Scantling questions again this week. I just know it. Are you starting Taysom over Bucky? No, I don't think I'd start Taysom over Bucky. No, I wouldn't do that. I don't think I'd start pretty much any of these tight ends over Bucky. No thanks. Drop Pitts for Hawkinson? Yeah, definitely drop Pitts for Hawkinson. Yeah. So I know we're going to get the Marcus Valdes-Scantling questions again. And I know I'm probably going to answer them wrong again, because this is the Marcus. This is like, for me, the most frustrating part of fantasy, where you got guys in, downright just bad roles, under 15% target share roles. The air yards there are there, though, for Scantling. Like, there is a ceiling for Scantling. We've seen it in back-to-back games. He's been over 16 points in back-to-back games. We know what we're getting with Scantling. And you got to step back. I got to step back and eat the L a little bit with Scantling before the bye. I told everyone to bench Scantling. He was on my must-bench list in week 11. Ended up getting one huge catch. Somehow, that catch was the longest touchdown catch of the season. I mean, it was a 75-yard touchdown or something. I don't know how Rashid Shaheed didn't have a longer touchdown than that. But a one catch for over 70 yards and a touchdown, ends with 2 catches for 87 and a touchdown. He's now at 3 touchdowns and almost 200 yards in his last 2 games. And his skill set undoubtedly meshes well with Derek Carr. He is a pretty good Shaheed replacement, a capable deep threat, capable of making big plays down the field. That's what Scantling is. I still don't want to start him, man. I still think his floor is basically 0 points. I don't like starting guys that aren't seeing significant targets. I mean, he's probably going to get 2 catches or less. We've now seen only 2 games this whole season where Scantling has more than 1 catch. They came in both the last 2 games. We got him projected for probably right around 2 or 3 catches in this game. So yeah, I much prefer to bench Scantling, but he's in the Jerick McKinnon type role from last playoffs. But that's the Saints. So we're starting Kamara, we're starting Taysom. You can't start anyone else. And I don't really want to start Derek Carr either. It's in this game, by the way, the Saints, they are 3-point underdogs at home, coming off the bye. I like the Rams here, though. I think the Rams offense, Puka, Kyren, and Kupp all have a fantastic opportunity this week. This game actually has the second highest over-under of the day, too. A lot of points projected in this game. All right, we got only 3 games left. Eagles, Ravens. A fantastic late window game here between 2 Super Bowl contenders. This could be a Super Bowl preview here between the Eagles and the Ravens. Then we got the 49ers, Bills. Another 2 teams. Really, much different spots, I guess, at this point. 49ers not Super Bowl contenders right now. They're just fighting for the playoffs. If the 49ers lose this game, by the way, they are under 10% chance to make the playoffs. This is a must-win playoff game here for the 49ers, and the Bills obviously contending. If they win the AFC East already. The earliest I think someone's won the AFC East in my lifetime. And then we'll talk about the Browns and Broncos too. So only 3 games left. All right, let's get to the Eagles-Ravens here. Fantastic game. A.J. Brown has to be started. There's likely no Devontae Smith this week. Let me hop back over to the wide receiver ranks here. We're projecting Devontae Smith is out right now. He is questionable. He is one of the only guys we're still sort of waiting to find out if he's truly out or not. But there was an ominous Ian Rappaport tweet this morning saying that there isn't optimism around Devontae Smith starting, and that means a massive target share is incoming for A.J. Brown in a fantastic matchup. Last week, we saw a 37% target share for A.J. Brown. We're projecting him for a 36% target share. This week, he could get 40%. Would not be crazy with Devontae Smith out. I mean, this has always been a consolidated offense, and when one of these guys is out, the targets really don't spread out. They just go to the other top options. A.J. Brown, Saquon, Dallas Goedert. They're going to eat up most of that Devontae Smith target share. A.J. Brown's wide receiver 1 this week. The Ravens allowed the most points to wide receivers this season. Jalen Hurts is QB1 this week. So we're starting A.J. Brown. We're starting Hurts. Saquon, he projects as running back 3. I mean, it feels weird to not put Saquon at running back 1 at this point, like every week. But there's obviously other good running backs and good spots. But Saquon's had 80 points, over 80 fantasy points in his last 2 games. I mean, he's firmly in the MVP race. A truly incredible game last time out. He had over 300 total yards. He was top 10 all time in total yards in that game. I mean, you compare him to what Adrian Peterson did in his MVP season. And he's doing better than Adrian Peterson did through this point of the season. He's above Adrian Peterson's averages from his MVP season. I think that was 2008. Wild stuff. I mean, you're not benching Saquon, obviously. Not the best matchup for him here, but doesn't matter. And then Dallas Goedert, he does get a boost with Devontae Smith out for sure. He does have at least 4 catches back-to-back games, only 19 yards last time out, but he had a 26% target share at least. He's over 20% back-to-back games. He's definitely a decent tight end option this week. We're playing Brian Thomas over Gus Edwards for sure. Seeing that one. We're going to get to the starts that's here momentarily. The Eagles, by the way, they are 3-point underdogs in Baltimore. I'm not sure I would agree with that. I get the game is in Baltimore. The Ravens need this win, I think, more than the Eagles too. But the Eagles are, I think they're on a 7-game win streak or something. The Eagles defense might be the best defense in the league right now too. I think this is going to be a difficult spot for the Ravens offense. Obviously, you're starting Lamar Jackson regardless. Obviously, you're starting Derrick Henry regardless. Zay Flowers, I'm a bit nervous for in this game versus the Eagles. We've seen the Eagles really shut down top receivers this season. And we were just looking at one of them. I think it was, who was the receiver we were just looking at against the Eagles? I think it was Terry McLaurin. Yeah, Terry McLaurin got absolutely shut down. Only 2 fantasy points. He had 1 catch in that game. Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp did do well last game. So there's a data point of top receivers doing well. But Zay Flowers has been under 12 fantasy points in 3 straight games now. I mean, he's really going to have to step up in this game. The Ravens are going to need to be able to throw here versus the Eagles. He did have a 38% target share last week in a game where the Ravens didn't throw that much. But he only had 5 catches, 62 yards, only 11.2 points. So he's a good start, not a must start. We'll go to wide receiver ranks, and then we'll go to the QB ranks. On the YouTube Live, we'll go to the running back ranks here. Mark Andrews is starting to heat up a little bit. I expect some Mark Andrews questions today. He's got at least 15 points now in 2 of his last 3. He disappointed in week 11. Isaiah Likely was back in the last 2 weeks, and the snap share was bad last game for Mark Andrews, only 41%. That was his 2nd lowest of the season. But he still saw 24% target share and still had 5 catches, 44 yards, and a touchdown. I'd prefer to bench Mark Andrews, though, over some of these other tight end options. I'm playing McBride, Kittle, Taysom, Hawkinson, Njoku, Ingram, Otten, and Goddard all over Andrews. And I think there's a good argument for Hunter Henry over Andrews, too, with the role he's in. Isaiah Likely being back is not good for him. Target share was there. This was actually, so it was 2nd lowest snap percentage this season, but his highest target share. He's been one of the more dependable options over the last couple of months for the Ravens. So he's startable, but not a must start. That's the Ravens here. Again, I think the Eagles probably covered the spread here. The 3-point underdogs. All right, let's get to the 49ers Bills game. I know a lot of you guys waiting for me to talk through this one. This is the night game tonight, and it's getting a lot of buzz because of the weather. I don't have my Weatherman Sam hat with me right now because I'm traveling for Thanksgiving, but Weatherman Sam's here. I got you. Weatherman Sam is here. Let's talk about the weather for all the games that have some weather reports. So this Bills 49ers game, it feels like 12 degrees. It's going to feel like 12 degrees throughout the game. So it's going to be cold. There's going to be light snow. So there was 2 feet of snow in Buffalo prior to the game. I think it might still be snowing. You're probably going to see some pictures out there. I know I've seen some on Twitter of just complete like downpouring snow in Buffalo, the whole field covered in snow, the whole stadium covered in snow. 2 feet of snow is a lot of snow. But guys, this is all happening before the game, not during the game, before the game. And they're going to clear the field before the game. I don't care how much snow it is. When the game starts, there's going to be basically no snow on the field. And then there's going to be some light snow during the game. There is still a possibility of actually no snow during the game. I want to cautiously lean towards some light snow, but guys, there's not going to be heavy snow during the game. And if you guys have been watching Weatherman Sam for long enough at this point, you know that the thing I care about by far the most, because there's the most evidence suggesting that it has the biggest impact on NFL offenses, it's the wind. And there is going to be some concerning wind in this game. 20 to 25 mile an hour wind gusts. That 25 mile an hour threshold is where I get really concerned. So we're like right on the line there. I'm not overreacting here. And definitely people are overreacting. This is one of those spots where the pictures are out there. Everyone wants the big snow game. We just had a big snow game, in the Steelers-Browns game. I wasn't overreacting there either. I actually underrated the amount of snow in that Browns-Steelers game, but we were right overall not to overreact. I mean, that game, the over smashed, and the passing offenses were very effective in that Browns-Steelers game. And remember, the thing that you really got to remember in these snow games is the defense has to play in the snow too. And a lot of times we see the defense actually struggle more than the offense. When, on defense, you got to react to the cuts. So yeah, don't overreact to this game for the Bills, 49ers. Don't let this, persuade you too much and start sit decisions and props and betting. I'm not overreacting. A Jennings versus JSN, I'm going JSN there. So we're going to get to the 49ers here just now. But just some other quick weather notes, because there's some other weather that's going to be talking points across the league. It's basically just cold weather. That's it. Steelers, Bengals, Seahawks, Jets, Colts, Pats. All those games are going to feel like around 20 degrees. So like similar cold temperatures to this Bills 49ers game. I'm not concerned at all. Like I really do not care about the cold unless it's extreme cold, unless it's extreme snow or extreme rain or extreme heat. Otherwise I do not care. Like I'm not waiting this at all. And there's going to be talking point, just like it was for the Dolphins game, which I did not think mattered. These guys will be in Under Armour. They'll wear sweatshirts. They have heaters on the sideline. Like they're going to be fine. And remember, both sides of the ball have to play in the weather. So yeah, I'm not really concerned at all overall about the weather. I think there's like some slight concern with the wind in this Bills 49ers game, up to 25-mile-an-hour wind gusts. But remember, this is just the gusts. This is not sustained wind. And there's going to be light snow at worst during the game. We just saw in the Steelers-Browns game, pretty heavy snow. It did not matter for the offenses. It's the wind that matters. All right, so that's the Weatherman Sam report in this game. So going to the actual start sits here. So McCaffrey, he's been pretty disappointing, man. He has not looked quite like himself. He's not looked like the explosive McCaffrey we're used to. He has not been over 80 rushing yards once. The role has been great. He's been playing over 80% of snaps. He's getting by far the bulk of the carries. And he's getting a good receiving role too. It's actually the receiving role that's keeping McCaffrey propped up in these fantasy projections because he's been an efficient receiver still. He's only at 3.5 yards per carry. I mean, that's 54th in the NFL. That's not much above Gus Edwards, who we were just, talking lowly of because of the efficiency. But the catch rate, 81%, 10.2 yards per reception. He's getting at least 3 catches in all 3 games. He's been over 25 receiving yards all 3 games. He had 6 catches, 68 in that first game. And the Bills have allowed so many receptions to running backs this season. 6.3 receptions per game, 49 receiving yards per game. That receptions number, that's the most allowed to running backs this season. The yards number is the 3rd most allowed to running backs. They're allowing over half a receiving touchdown to running backs. That's insane. And they've actually been pretty good allowing rushing touchdowns. But in total, they're allowing a touchdown per game to running backs. They're allowing 135 yards per game to running backs. They're the 3rd best running back matchup this season, the Buffalo Bills. So you got to be starting McCaffrey with a ton of confidence still. I'll switch over to the running back ranks here. Switch back to the wide receiver ranks here on the YouTube live because I know there's a bunch of wide receiver questions in this one too. I mean, it's really tough with these wide receivers. But the big thing for this whole 49ers offense is Brock Purdy is starting, which is massive. I mean, we talked about it last live. Brandon Allen is not it. Brandon Allen, we knew was going to struggle last week. And this is a playoff game basically for the 49ers. They lose, they're basically out of the playoffs. They're under 10% to make the playoffs. If they lose this game, the 49ers could win the rest of their games and still not get into the playoffs. So that paints the picture pretty well for why Purdy's going to push through. I think it's shoulder soreness. Yeah, I think both him and Lawrence, similar situations with shoulder soreness. I think for both of them, they're both going to be playing this week, both trying to gut it out here down the stretch of the season. But this is massive for the whole team. And George Kittle, he's a must start. And Juwan Jennings and Debo are much better options with Brock Purdy starting. And we've seen Juwan Jennings absolutely ball with Brock Purdy this season. He only had 9 points last week with Brandon Allen. He still had a 27% target share in that game, still outproduced Debo. He's now outproduced Debo in 3 straight games since he's been back. So Jennings, I would play over Debo. I think the game environment here with some of the weather conditions, with the matchup too, like I won't be surprised if Debo bounces back a bit, especially with Purdy dealing with a shoulder injury. Maybe he skews a little bit more to the short passing game with CMC and Debo. Debo too, he could benefit from some of those running back numbers we were looking at. The Bills allowing, the most catches per game to running back. Maybe they use Debo in that way a little bit in this spot. That would make sense to try to get Debo some layup targets. He has not been good since week 6. We have not seen him go over 13 fantasy points since week 6. He's been over 13 points once since week 2. I mean, really rough season here for Debo. He's averaging 10.5 points per game. That ranks 43rd among wide receivers. He has not looked like himself. He's not made the big plays that he's made. He's actually made a bunch of costly drops, 2 over the last few games. Debo's not a must start at this point. I would start Jennings over him. And the Bills have been very good versus receivers. They actually have allowed the fewest points per game to receivers this season. We saw a few receivers succeed, recently. Week 11, it was Xavier Worthy. Week 10, it was all 3 of the Colts receivers went over 13 points. So a couple recent games where we've seen the Bills let up some fantasy points to receivers. But yeah, Jennings, Debo there. I'd say Jennings is a good start, not a must start. Debo's an okay start, definitely not a must start. But Kittle's a must start. McCaffrey's a must start. I'd rather not start Purdy too if I didn't have to. Like I'd start Anthony Richardson over Purdy. Definitely a ceiling for Purdy, but coming off the injury, not the easiest matchup. Bills allowing the 6th fewest points per game to quarterbacks this season. Shakir or Vele. Yeah, so let's give the Bills side of the ball here. So again, I'm not worried about the weather. I'm really not letting the weather dictate my decision-making here on this Sunday. And I think this is one of the spots that is just really, really clear. People are going to overreact to the weather because of the pictures before the game, because of the 2 feet of snow before the game. But again, before the game really doesn't matter. I remember there was a game just like this last year. I don't remember if it was the Bills, like multiple feet of snow before the game, but there was projected no snow, no wind during the game, not even that cold during the game. And it's like the game starts and there's absolutely no snow to be seen. They clear the field, guys, before the game. They're not going to be playing in feet of snow. There's going to be some light snow maybe in the game. Josh Allen still needs to be started 100%. We're in the part of the season now where Josh Allen is in playoff mode. This is playoff mode for Josh Allen, and that just means so much rushing. We've seen 20 carries from Josh Allen in his last 2 games. 12, a season-high 12 carries in his last game versus the Chiefs. He had a 39% rush share. That was a season high as well. He's actually gone back-to-back games over a 25% rush share. He's been over 20 points now in 6 consecutive games. And we really haven't seen the ceiling for Josh Allen yet. Outside of week 1 and week 3, he's not been over 30 points since week 3. That's the ceiling still Josh Allen has, especially if he's running this much. He's got back-to-back games with a rushing touchdown there. The passing touchdowns didn't really match. Only has 1 passing touchdown in his last 2 games. But if he has one of these games where he matches the passing touchdowns with the receiving touchdowns, like we saw in week 1, he had 2 passing touchdowns and 2 rushing touchdowns, and he was 31.2 points QB1. He hasn't been QB1 since week 3. But yeah, he's got to be starting. He projects his QB3 only behind Jalen Hurts and only behind Lamar Jackson. James Cook, he's probably got to be started in most spots this week. He's been over 15 points now in 2 straight. He's been at least 11.5 in 4 straight. He only had 20 rushing yards in the last game, but he did have 2 rushing touchdowns. And he had 5 catches, only for 7 yards. Snap percentage was only 37% in that game versus the Chiefs. He averages 1.9 yards per touch. Ty Johnson and Ray Davis have been mixing in. I didn't realize how few snaps he played in this game. They're only 37% of snaps. It was a season low for James Cook. No reason to think that stays. He only had a 29% rush share, probably because he was being so ineffective. He had a 16% target share, but only had 5 catches. He only had 7 receiving yards. So just a really inefficient day, but not a horrible spot for him here versus the 49ers. Still projects running back 15 among the running backs left. So he's a good start, not a must start. Hop over the tight end ranks here, seeing someone ask for that. There's no Dalton Kincaid in this game, and we are still waiting on official report about Keon Coleman. He is a true questionable in this game too, and this is the night game. So we're not going to know about Devontae Smith 100%. We're projecting Devontae Smith out right now, which obviously has massive fantasy implications for A.J. Brown and Dallas Goedert and Saquon too. But this has pretty big fantasy implications here too for the receivers here. Coleman exited the Bills' Week 12 bye, sporting a red non-contact jersey, operating as a limited participant through Week 13 practices. He was limited participant in each of the last 3 practices. He appears to be truly questionable with the wrist injury here in Week 13. Keon Coleman, if you guys recall, before he picked up the injury in Week 9, he really broke out in Week 7 and Week 8. When Amari Cooper joined the team, it's when he broke out. 4 catches, 125 in that game versus the Titans. He was their best receiver in that game. And then he went 570 and a touchdown in Week 8. We really haven't seen him since with the wrist injury. So true question mark here. In most of the start-sits, guys, you can't start Keon Coleman. A very real chance he doesn't play, which would be pretty massive for Amari and Khalil Shakir. I think it helps Amari Cooper even more because I think Coleman and Amari are more of the deep threats, sharing a similar role here. Amari Cooper should be playing in this game. Yeah, he returned to action last game. He only had 2 catches versus the Chiefs. He didn't play a ton, only 51% snap share. This could be, it really should be the highest snap percentage we see for Amari this season. If you step back and think about it, they get the bye week. Keon Coleman might not play. Wouldn't be shocking to see closer to 70% snap share here for Amari. Definitely a ceiling here for Amari Cooper in the spot versus the 49ers. It's not an amazing matchup for the receivers. The 49ers have been 9th best versus receivers this season. But Khalil Shakir is still a good option too. I mean, he's been incredibly consistent, guys. He's had at least 11 points now in 5 straight games, at least 6 catches in 5 straight games. He is the underneath target. He's played over 70% snaps in back-to-back games too. Those are both season highs. He had a season high 31.6% target share in his last game. I know there's been a bunch of wide receiver injuries, but Shakir is the wide receiver 1 on the Bills right now. Do not get it confused. And again, no Dalton Kincaid. That's pretty big for Khalil Shakir. Get to the running back list here. Marv or Taysom? Yeah, I'm going Marv over Taysom. I don't want to start 2 tight ends if I don't need to, as much as I love Devontae Adams or Elijah Moore. Yeah, got to be Adams. I'll go to the running back list here on the TikTok live. Hop over to the running back list here on the YouTube live as well. But yeah, so I like Shakir a lot with Dalton Kincaid out. And Dawson Knox, he's a sleeper this week for sure. With Dalton Kincaid out, we're going to see Dawson Knox play near 100% of the snaps. He had 84% snap share in week 11 with Kincaid out. So he's going to be in a real role here. 4 catches, 40 yards in that game. Had a 16% target share. So 25% of the team's air yards. He's got a pretty good chance at a touchdown, given his history with Josh Allen. He only has 1 touchdown this season. The 49ers, they've been pretty good, though, versus tight ends, versus receivers. They've been only okay versus running backs. They've been decent versus quarterbacks. And not a bad defense here for the 49ers. Probably doesn't matter much, though, versus the Bills. So again, the spread here, the Bills are 6.5-point favorites. I think I'd probably take the 49ers with the points just because this is a playoff game for them, more so than it is for the Bills. This is the season on the line for the 49ers. That's why Purdy's going to go. All right, one more game to get through. Then we'll get to the props, the DraftKings lineup, and then we'll grind start sits, rest of live stream. All right, Browns versus Broncos. We got the Jerry Jeudy revenge game here. So let's start with the Browns. There's going to be no Cedric Tillman this week, which is absolutely massive for Jerry Jeudy, who's really come on in his last couple of games. He's got 40 fantasy points, guys, in his last 2 games. He's got back-to-back games with at least 6 catches and 85 yards. He's got 3 straight games now with at least 6 catches and 70 yards. He's got 4 straight games with at least 5 catches and 70 yards. Really tough test here versus the Broncos, but I'm willing to have some faith in Jeudy in this revenge game. This is a true revenge game, too, for Jeudy. Did not end on great terms with the Broncos. He's probably going to have Surtain on him most of this game. We did see Jacoby Myers and Trey Tucker do okay in the last game versus the Broncos. Both went over 15 points. The Falcons receivers really struggled, though, the week before that. Jeudy is not a must start. This week, he projects really well. He's a start over a lot of guys that are going to be pretty tough calls. Let me go up to the wide receiver ranks here. Jeudy projects it better than Sutton, better than Adams, McLaurin, Jennings, Zay Flowers, JSN. I don't know if I'd play him over JSN. I don't know if I'm playing him over Zay Flowers either. Some very tough calls with Jerry Jeudy this week. I'd play Garrett Wilson, though, over him, Marvin Harrison Jr. over him, Brian Thomas Jr. over him. I think Devontae Adams and Sutton, I'd probably play over him. It's pretty close, but Jeudy projects really well without Tillman and how much the Browns have been passing. And the Browns in this game are 6-point underdogs versus the Broncos. I mean, they're going to have to throw. So I like Njoku a lot in this spot too. And Elijah Moore is definitely an interesting sleeper as well. He's actually had a really consistent role on this offense since Winston took over. He's been seeing really consistent target shares. He's over 17% target share in 4 straight games. But he's just a deep sleeper, a deep league option, not a guy I really want to start. But if you need to start him, you could do worse. I saw an Elijah Moore versus Devontae Adams question in the TikTok live. Like that, we're starting Adams there. Come on. Nick Chubb is startable in this spot too. I mean, he's coming off a pretty big game. He scored twice in that snow game. By far his best game since he's been back. He played a season-high 65% of snaps in that game. Saw a season-high 74% rush share in this game. I mean, this is probably close to a career-high rush share, guys, for Nick Chubb. I mean, we really haven't seen in the past him get like these massive rush shares. He's almost always split some of the backfield, and we're seeing a little bit less of that this season, which is definitely a little surprising. He had 20 carries in this game. Still was really inefficient. Only 3 yards per carry. He's been really inefficient this year. 3 yards per carry. That's 62nd. That's behind Gus Edwards. That's behind Christian McCaffrey. But the volume's there and the touchdown ceiling's there. The matchup is not terrible against the Broncos for the running backs. So Chubb is startable, not a must start. And Njoku's really borderline must start, though. Unless you have McBride, Kittle, Taysom Hawkinson, then you're playing Njoku. I'm playing Njoku over Ingram, over Otten, over Dallas Goedert. All right, on the last team to get here to the Broncos, Bo Nix versus the Browns. He's startable, ranks as QB 10. Sutton's a good start. I would probably start Sutton over Judy if I had to make that call, but revenge game here for Judy. I like that narrative too. Javonte Williams, not a guy I feel amazing about. He had 2.4 points in his last game, -2 rushing yards. Still played 55% of snaps, but horribly inefficient on the ground. He did get 4 targets, only got 2 of those for 6 yards. I mean, he's been really inconsistent. He's been under 11 points now in 4 of his last 5 games. Not a guy I want to start. This whole backfield is an absolute nightmare for fantasy. I've seen a lot of Devon Vele questions this week. He's had back-to-back games over 10 points. He's playing over 65% of the snaps pretty consistently. He had a season-high 23% target share last week. This is a rookie, I believe. Yeah, rookie wide receiver. He's a 27-year-old rookie wide receiver. Do not know how that's possible. But he's not a bad sleeper this week for sure. We got him projected for 40 yards, 3.5 catches in this game, a top 40 wide receiver option. Yeah, I would drop Andrews for Taysom pretty easily. I'm not dropping Otten for I prefer Otten over Andrews, seeing that question in the YouTube live, in the TikTok live, excuse me. All right, that's the Broncos and Browns game. I do think the Browns keep this game close. 6-point underdogs feels like a lot to give to the Browns. Most of their games have been close this season, so I think I'd take the 6 points there. That was it. That was every single game, every single relevant player in every single game. We talked through the weather as well. All right, let's get to the 3 free player props quick. Then we'll go to the DraftKings lineup. Then we'll grind through the start sits. After that, let me read through this quick. Why Juwan over Ridley? Washington allowed the most total receiving yards this year. Yeah, I think Ridley versus Juwan is close. I think Ridley projects a little bit too low in these rankings. I'd probably start him over some of these guys. The Commanders have allowed a lot of receiving yards per game this season. Let me hop back over to this. 132 yards per game. I don't think they've allowed the most receiving yards per game, at least to wide receivers this season. CeeDee Lamb had 67 yards against them too. But yeah, I like Ridley. I think Jennings, though, with Purdy is definitely a good option too. Honestly, I think it might be Jennings over Purdy. It's close. Definitely a close call. All right, let's get to the 3 free player props of the day. So we are at 62% on the free player props this season. We only went 1 for 3 on Thanksgiving. A bit unlucky there. We had the Sam Laporta props. He scored twice and had 6 receiving yards. I mean, that was a rough go there. But I got 3 that I really like today. Number 1, and the one I like the most, is Justin Herbert, over 247.5 passing yards. So we've seen, I think it's 4 straight games we've seen quarterbacks beat this line versus the Falcons. And the Falcons coming out of the bye, but we saw Bo Nix go for 307. We saw Derek Carr go for 269. We saw Dak Prescott and Cooper Rush combined for 248, just beating this line, the Cowboys. And then Baker Mayfield went for 330. So 4 consecutive games, we've seen quarterbacks or teams pass for over this line. And now we got Justin Herbert, who's coming off just a 218 passing yard game, but he's actually beat this line in 4 of his last 6 games. And J.K. Dobbins is out. And I think that is going to lead to more pass volume in this game. This game is projected to be very close. The Chargers are only 1-point favorites in this game. I like Ladd McConkey a lot this week. So I like this line a lot for Justin Herbert. I think he's got a great chance to score over 300 passing yards this week. He projects as a really good fantasy option too. All right, so that's prop number 1. Then Marvin Harrison Jr., over 3.5 receptions. We missed on a Marv prop last week. I think we had Marv last week. I like this one. Actually, I don't think we did. I think we actually went 2 for 3. I think we only missed on the Adonai Mitchell one. But I like Marv a lot this week. I think he's a big sleeper in how people are thinking about him right now. He only had 3 catches last week versus the Seahawks. The Seahawks defense, though, has been very good over the last month. And they get a Vikings defense that has been pretty torched by receivers this season. Just last week, we saw DJ Moore, Keenan Allen, and Rome Odunze beat this line. I mean, Marvin Harrison Jr., maybe he continues to get out-targeted by Trey McBride. That wouldn't be that surprising. But he's still the clear wide receiver 1 on the team. 3.5 receptions. I think this is like around -140 odds. I'd like this over 4.5 too at plus odds. I think Marvin Harrison Jr. gets at least 5 catches. I think he's got an incredibly high ceiling. in this spot versus the Vikings. The Cardinals are also underdogs in this game, 3-point underdogs. I think they got a good chance to beat the Vikings in this spot, but just a really good matchup here for Marvin Harrison Jr. The Vikings, they're allowing 12.7 catches per game. That's the third most in the NFL, just to wide receivers. I mean, so many receivers have beat this line. Ridley beat it. DJ Moore beat it. Keenan Allen beat it. Rome Odunze beat it. Josh Downs beat this. Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp both beat this. Amon-Ra beat this. All the elite receivers, Allen Lazard and Garrett Wilson. I mean, that's going back, pretty far to week 5. But yeah, Marvin Harrison Jr. over 3.5 receptions feels like a borderline lock to me this week. I think he's getting really underrated. I know he's been a bit volatile and inconsistent, but this is a good matchup here for Marv. And he's coming off a season high snap percentage. Marvin Harrison Jr. off the bye week for the Cardinals. And then Brian Thomas Jr. is another guy I feel very confident about. The two rookie juniors here, over 62.5 receiving yards. This is a pretty high line for Brian Thomas Jr., about as high as we've seen, I think, from him this season, this prop line here, but for good reason. There's no Christian Kirk. There's no Gabe Davis, and Trevor Lawrence is back. Thank God Trevor Lawrence is back for this passing attack because Mac Jones was not it. Mac Jones is not it. But this is also a really good spot for him versus the Texans. And we've seen receivers beat this versus the Texans almost every single week. We saw Ridley do it last week. We saw Turpin and CeeDee Lamb do it the week before that. We didn't see any of the Lions receivers do it, but that was because they ran like crazy in that game. We saw Garrett Wilson and Devontae Adams do it the week before that. So 3 of the last 4 weeks, we've seen multiple, I think it was 2, 4, 5, 6 receivers do it in the last 4 games. Versus the Texans, the Jags are big underdogs in this game. Versus the Texans, actually only 3.5-point underdogs, but they should have to throw plenty in this game. Brian Thomas Jr., I think, goes over 100 yards today. I think his ceiling is incredibly high, and the target share upside is also just really, really high. It's him and Evan Ingram, and that's pretty much it. Next up is Parker Washington for the Jags. So those are the 3 free player props. I feel very good about all 3 of these overs. Justin Herbert passing, Marvin Harrison reception, and Brian Thomas Jr. yards is the 3 free player props. All right, let's get to the DraftKings lineup quick. Then we're on to the start sits on the live stream. Let me get to the high-level takes here on the TikTok live as well. Some of the must-starts, must-benches that I talked to the DraftKings on. We did cash on Thanksgiving. Not a huge cash. I think I turned 5 into 8 or something with my Thanksgiving DraftKings lineup. These are tournament lineups, so I'm not settling for small wins. I want a big first-place win here. That's what I'm going for with this lineup here. Stacking Herbert with Ladd. We got Marv and Brian Thomas Jr. in this lineup as well. So we got all three of the free player props in the DraftKings lineup. And then I'm going with Bucky Irving. Bucky Irving is going to be very highly owned on DraftKings this week with his price point, but he's priced too low. And I think I'm able to differentiate enough here with the rest of the lineup that I'm not too worried about getting some high ownership guys. So we're stacking Herbert with Ladd. We're running it back with Bijan in that Chargers-Falcons game. We did just see Derrick Henry do very well versus Chargers defense. I think Bijan, we didn't talk much about Bijan, but he's a smash play this week. He'd easily be the running back 1 this week. Would not be that crazy. So we're going Bucky, Bijan, Ladd. I'm going with the 2 rookie receivers whose props I like this week. I think both guys have a chance to go over 100 yards. I like JSN versus the Jets. He's probably going to be pretty low owned at his price point. Then we're going with Taysom at tight end. I mean, there's no tight ends on the slate with a higher ceiling than Taysom. This is a tournament lineup. And then we're going with the Cardinals defense as well. They've been a bit sporadic at times this year, but I like their ceiling versus the Vikings as well. So that's the DraftKings lineup this week. Like this one a lot. I don't know how we're able to fit, honestly, all these guys in. I mean, Taysom's price way too low, and he's like the 3rd tight end on the slate. All right, that's the DraftKings lineup this week. We're into start-sit mode now. All right, we're going to be grinding start-sits for the rest of live. In the next couple of hours ahead of us here, we got some great games on our TV screens, guys, in just a couple of hours. And we got plenty of live stream left. We're just getting started here. Guys, if you're just tuning in or you've been tuned in from the start, we just went game by game, talked through every single game on the slate today. Smash the like button if you're watching live on YouTube. Hit the subscribe button. Helps me out a ton. If you're watching live on TikTok, guys, hit the follow button. I'm not able to see your comments unless you are following. That is how TikTok works. So make sure you smash the follow button. Hey, Sam, do I go with Richardson or Stroud? So like we've been doing the last few weeks, we're going to start with the QB ranks. QB start sits. If you got QB start sits, send them in the chat. Then we're going to go to the tight end start sits, and then we're going to go through the flex. The running back receiver starts at the same time. All right, so yeah, I would go Stroud versus Richardson. I'm going Stroud there. I do like Richardson this week. Richardson versus Bo Nix, that's close. I think I might go Richardson over Bo Nix, honestly. Bo Nix has been better than Richardson. I like this spot for Richardson a lot, though, versus the Pats. He's been running a ton. I think he's got a really good chance at a rushing touchdown. He has 20 carries in his last 2 games. Herbert or Kyler, I'm going Herbert there. I'm playing Herbert over basically everybody, unless you have Joe Burrow, Josh Allen, Lamar, Hurts. Richardson or Kyler, yeah, that one's Kyler, I think, over Richardson. Herbert or Allen, yeah, I'm going Allen there. And I'm not scared of the weather. I'm not letting the weather scare me off of Josh Allen. We got playoff Josh Allen right now, guys. He's running a ton. He's been over 25% rush share in back-to-back games. I'm not benching Josh Allen. He's been over 20 points and it was like 6 straight games or something. So no, unless I have Lamar or Hurts, I'm not benching Josh Allen. And I like Herbert. I got Herbert only 2 spots below Josh Allen. I mean, it's close. It's definitely close. Bo Nix and CJ. Yeah, I'm going CJ over Bo Nix. CJ Stroud versus the Jags, guys. Massive ceiling. I mean, if I wasn't going to go with the Herbert Lad stack in my DraftKings lineup, I'd probably go with the Stroud, Nico, Dell stack in the DraftKings lineup because the Jags have been horrible this season. Nico is going to explode in this game. I think he easily goes over 100 yards in this game. Daniels or Richardson? Yeah, it's got to be Daniels over Richardson still. Vikings D or Colts D? I'd probably go Colts defense there. Bucky or Kenneth? We're going to get to the running back start sits here in a second. I think it's Kenneth, though. I think it's Kenneth over Bucky. Any other quarterback start sits here? Russ, Jameis, and Trevor. Yeah, this is a tough one. Russell Wilson, Jameis Winston, and then Trevor Lawrence. Looks like it might be Winston. It's tough to start Trevor Lawrence and Purdy this week. It's really tough to start both those guys. I think it's Winston. Man, versus the Broncos, a little bit scary. I could see a good argument for Russ. I'm starting Russ and Winston over Lawrence for sure. I got them a tier above Lawrence. I got them both back to back. Yeah, they're really close in projection here. The floor is safer for Russ. The ceiling's higher for Winston. I kind of agree with that as well. Man, look at this graph. Beautiful graph here. Yeah, the ceiling's higher for Winston. The floor is much safer for Russ. I mean, it's a good matchup for Russ versus the Bengals. The Bengals have not been the best defense this season. They rank, his 5th worst versus quarterbacks. They've played some pretty good QBs, though. Look at all these QBs that have gone over 24 points. It's Herbert, Lamar, Hurts, Lamar, and Daniels. They played some really good QBs. The Bengals defense may be a little bit better than they seem with those matchups. And the Broncos, they have Pat Surtain. They've been good. I think they're a little bit overrated defensively. Man, only one QB over 20 points, though. Is Winston really going to be the second QB over 20 points versus the Broncos? I think, honestly, looking at this, it's probably Russ. I think I'd lean Russ over Winston versus the Broncos. Kind of a scary spot there for Winston on Monday night. They project close to. Bo Nix or AR, yeah, it's super close between these two guys. They project 0.1. It separates their projections here. I honestly think there's a good argument for Anthony Richardson. We've seen 2 quarterbacks back-to-back absolutely destroy the Pats. I'm going Herbert over Kyler. I'm playing Kittle over Taysom. I'm playing Kyler over Bo Nix. I'm playing Herbert over Baker, but they're back-to-back too, and they're also 0.1 apart. They're in the same tier. It's really tough between Herbert and Baker. I'm both really good options this week, but yeah, I lean Herbert. And yeah, Anthony Richardson, he's got a higher ceiling than Bo Nix. We're looking at on the YouTube live right now. If you're watching live on TikTok, by the way, guys, come to the YouTube live. Link is right in the TikTok bio. It's a better viewing experience. Also, if I don't get to your start sit, you got to download the Walter Picks app. It's a free app. I spent the last 4 years of my life helping build the app. Link it to that is also in the TikTok bio. Someone asking, why is Josh Allen so hot in the QB ranks with the snow? I'm not scared about some light snow. There's 2 feet of snow before the game, but there's only going to be light snow during the game. Ramondre against the Colts defense has been crushed by running backs. Yeah, it's not a terrible spot. Yeah, I do have the must start list here for the TikTok live. We'll hop over to the running back ranks next. All right, let's go to the tight ends. I think I got to most of the QB starts. Hey, Sam, OG, Grant, how we doing, man? May or Winston, a 10-yard, 1.6-point TD league. Yeah, it's May. I think it's May over Winston. Man, Winston projects a tiny bit better here. I think I'd go Drake May, though. I'm pretty scared for Winston against the Broncos. Much better matchup here for May. May's been running more than Winston, too. I think I'd lean May over Winston. Hawk versus Njoku, yeah, they're back-to-back in the tight end ranks. I think I got Hawkinson just slightly over Njoku with Josh Oliver still out. All right, let's get to the tight end. Let's go to the tight end ranks here. Any tight end questions before we hop over to the running backs, receivers, and we grind through the flex? Joe or Herbert, I have Lad. Yeah, I don't really care about the stacking unless you're down big. If you're down big from some of the Thanksgiving points that were scored, and there was a lot of Thanksgiving points scored, then maybe you lean towards the stack. Otherwise, just play the best play, and that's Joe Burrow over Herbert. And yeah, I'm not playing Baker over Josh Allen. Otten or Ingram. Yeah, let's hop over to the tight end ranks here. Taysom or Ingram. Yeah, so I'm playing Ingram over Otten, but I'm playing Taysom over both of them. Like pretty easily. It's McBride. He's sort of in a tier of his own this week. See if we got any tight end questions here in the YouTube live. We got a good one here. Henry or Ertz and Happy PR. Taysom or Kittle. Yeah, so it's Kittle over Taysom. You really can't bench Kittle. Purdy's playing. Kittle has been the number one tight end in fantasy this season. I mean, this is a truly incredible season so far from Kittle. 17.9 points per game. He has not had a bad game. He's missed 2 games, but he has not had a bad game, guys. He has not gotten under 14 points since week 1. He's averaging almost a touchdown per game. He's leading all tight ends in touchdowns by a mile. And he's been the most dependable, reliable, consistent, and explosive player on the 49ers all season. So yeah, in this playoff game versus the Bills, where the weather I do not think is going to be bad, you got to be going with Kittle, even over Taysom. But then it's Taysom, man. Yeah, it's McBride over Taysom too. Then it's Taysom. Taysom's going to get carries. He's going to get targets. He had a 35% target share and a 25% rush share in his last couple. I got you, Colton. Fly safe, by the way. Start 2, James Cook, B-Rob, Thielen, Amari Addison, have Jefferson. Yeah, I think you go with the 2 running backs here. I think that's much safer than the other receiver options that we talked about. The Panthers receivers, but yeah, I think one of those guys will end up doing well. But good luck guessing who. I think it'd be the first 2 running backs here. Addison's coming off a big game too, but I don't feel great about his floor either. Pull up the tight end ranks here. Taysom or Marv. Yeah, I'm playing like all the receivers over all the tight ends, basically. I played Marv over Taysom. I'm playing Taysom over Otten. DK lineup. CJ, I talked through the DK lineup on the YouTube live. I'll pull it up again here just quickly. The DK lineup, I'm stacking Justin Herbert with Ladd. Then I'm going with Bucky and Bijan in the running back slots. I'm going with Marvin Harrison Jr., Brian Thomas, and JSN in the other running back and the wide receiver and flex slots. I'm playing Taysom on DraftKings, and then I'm going with the Cardinals defense. That's the DraftKings lineup today. All right, see if there's any more tight end start sits here before we. Richardson or Darnold? I'd go Richardson over Darnold. MVS, Wicks, or Palmer in a deep league must win this week. Man. So Wicks already played. So he's out. Hopefully you didn't start him. Marcus Valdes-Scantling versus Palmer. It's Palmer, man. You got to go Palmer. Bench Scantling. We're on team bench Scantling pretty much all season at this point. All right, I think that's all the tight end questions I saw. Henry or Goddard? That one's pretty close. I would go Goddard, though, with Devontae Smith projected out. How does Noah Fant not make your list? Yes, his first game back in a while. Fair question, because there's a long list. I got Jordan Akins. I actually think Noah Fant was the first guy left off the list. Let's scroll down to Noah Fant here. Yeah, he's one spot behind Jordan Akins. They actually project 0.3 points apart. I mean, it's pretty tough to get super excited about Noah Fant. We haven't seen him since week 8, where he had 5 points. In his last 5 games, he's been under 5.5 points in 3 of them. Metcalf's playing, Lockett's playing, JSN's playing. The Jets have been the 5th best defense versus tight ends this season. So yeah, I'm not too excited about Noah Fant. I mean, literally Trey McBride only had 11 points versus the Jets. So yeah, Jordan Akins versus Noah Fant. No, it's close. I wouldn't knock you for going Fant there, but love the help every Sunday, man. Anderson, I got you. All right, we're on to the flex start sits now. What's the creator code for Walter Picks? Code Sam. Use code Sam. It's right here on the TikTok Live. Use code Sam. It does help me out. Appreciate that. If you've downloaded the Walter Picks app for the first time, guys, it's going to help you with fantasy. It's going to help you with props. It's a free app. Use code Sam. You'll get a free 7-day trial. Yeah, we're playing McBride over Otten. Yeah, top to the wide receiver ranks here. Elijah Moore versus MVS. Yeah, we're going Elijah Moore. And like maybe you could argue MVS has a higher ceiling than Elijah Moore, but man, I'm not starting Scantling over Elijah Moore. There's no way Scantling gets more targets than Elijah Moore. I'd be shocked. Hey, Sam, Sutton or T. Higgins? Yeah, so T. Higgins is one of the tougher start sits this week for sure, because this is his first game back, right? Or he played, I think, before the bye, 1 game as well, which bodes definitely well for him. Yeah, he scored 29.8 points before the bye week, 9 catches, 148. Didn't play the 3 games before that. I think it was a hamstring injury he was dealing with. But yeah, there's no benching Higgins. It's so difficult to bench T. Higgins. He's at the 5th most fantasy points per game among receivers. He ranks 7th in both receptions and receiving yards. He ranks 8th in touchdowns per game among wide receivers this season. He has played so well when he's been out there, and there's no reason to expect he's not at full strength heading into this game. So yeah, I'm going T. Higgins. Why do we have Brian Thomas Jr. ranked so high? Yeah, so his prop line's at 62.5 today, Brian Thomas Jr., and he's one of the free player props today. I think he goes over that. Trevor Lawrence is starting. There's obviously no Christian Kirk, no Gabe Davis, and the Texans have been crushed by wide receivers this season. I think an extremely high ceiling for BTJ, Brian Thomas Jr. this week, and a pretty solid floor too, target share wise. Juwan Jennings or Najee Harris. Yeah, I'd go Juwan Jennings there over Najee. Najee is really just a complete floor play. He's fully a floor play. He's going to get at least 16 opportunities. We just looked at that. Najee Harris has had at least 16 total carries plus targets in every game this season, but he's only been over 20 points once. So he's a good floor option because of the volume, decent chance at a touchdown, but there's not a huge ceiling. Jennings definitely has a much higher ceiling. All right, this is a good one here. Bucky Irving versus Brian Thomas Jr. versus Chuba Hubbard. I definitely would go Bucky over Hubbard. That one's actually pretty close. And then I'm curious to see how these guys compare to Brian Thomas Jr. Yeah, it's Bucky. I'd go Bucky over Brian Thomas Jr. Brian Thomas Jr. versus Garrett Wilson. It's Brian Thomas Jr. Yeah, I'm pretty nervous for Garrett Wilson, honestly. I would actually go Devontae Adams over Garrett Wilson. Garrett Wilson or Terry McLaurin. That one's Garrett Wilson. Rashad White or Tank Dell. That one's pretty close. Rashad White versus Tank Dell. That's actually really close. I don't hate Rashad White this week, and I don't hate Tank Dell either. I mean, both these guys, Tank Dell gets the Jags. Rashad White gets the Panthers. I mean, 2 great matchups there. It's Rashad White. Just slightly. It's Rashad White. I would not be shocked to see either of these guys have huge games. I would argue that, yeah, and Walter agrees with me on this too. If you're watching the YouTube live, again, if you're watching live on TikTok, guys, come to the YouTube live. It's right in the TikTok bio. I can share screen on the YouTube live. I can pull up comments on the YouTube live. All the same info though, whether you stay on TikTok or come to the YouTube live. Shout out to everybody, guys, watching this live stream right now. I appreciate you guys all so much. If you're watching live on TikTok, guys, hit the follow button. I cannot see your comments if you don't follow. I do appreciate the follows. So Tank Dell gets the Jags. His ceiling is really high in this game. A 9% chance to go over 25 points. Rashad White has a much lower ceiling because Bucky Irving is the better running back on his own team. We saw Rashad White score last week, even with Bucky having a huge game. He only had 12 points, though. We saw Rashad White lose almost all of the receiving work to Bucky last week. That was pretty concerning. He only had 1 target. I think Bucky had 6. Maybe it is Tank Dell. Man, it's close. And I think Tank Dell does have a higher ceiling. I think I actually would go Tank looking at this more. Rashad White projects just barely over Tank Dell, 0.3 points more. In close spots like this, I tend to lean to the guy who has more ceiling. Brian Thomas Jr., Ladd, and Garrett Wilson. Yeah, so it's Ladd, then BTJ, then Garrett Wilson. Vikings or Colts defense. I think it's the Colts defense over the Vikings defense. Yo, Sam, great Sunday for football. It is a fantastic Sunday for football, man. It is the best day of the week. We've already been blessed with a bunch of good football games so far this week. And we got plenty of great games this week, man, especially in this late window. I mean, the early window, probably the game to get most excited for. The Cardinals-Vikings game, the Steelers-Bengals game will be fun. The Chargers and Falcons game is a big one. But then the late window, we get the Rams-Saints, the Eagles-Ravens, and then tonight the 49ers and Bills. I mean, tons of great football today. All right, Bucky, Kyren, Pickens, Breece Hall, pick 3 here. Man, so let's go to the running back tiers here on the TikTok live. Hop over to the running back ranks on the YouTube live too. I got Bucky one spot ahead of Breece Hall. So I'm playing Bucky over Breece Hall, and that's close, man. It's close. Breece Hall coming into this game with a knee injury, though. And Breece Hall playing the Seahawks, who the Seahawks have really come into form defensively over the last month. We actually have not seen a big running back performance versus the Seahawks. They've allowed 23 points per game this season. They're allowing the 5th most rushing yards per game to running backs this season. But over the last month, it's been a different story. Kyren Williams, he went under 11 points. McCaffrey, I think that was his first game back. McCaffrey, he only had 15 points. And most of that was in through the 4 catches he had. James Conner, he went under 10. So Kyren, McCaffrey, and Conner in the last 3 games versus the Seahawks all went under 15 points. Definitely not great there for Breece, who actually projects for more than 15 points this week because he had 31.1 last week, 7 catches in his last game. That was a season high, tied a season high, 7 catches. Not many running backs can do that. But yeah, I'm going Bucky against the Panthers. Much easier matchup for Bucky for sure over Breece. All right, so then the other part of this question, Then, so we got Breece Hall versus, yeah, we're definitely going Breece over Kyron. And then Pickens. I think I would go Pickens over Kyron Williams, maybe too. Man, Kyron actually projects better than Breece. Yeah, it's Kyron's and Pickens. You're benching Breece here. You're playing Kyron, Pickens, and Bucky all over Breece. Kenneth Walker versus Breece Hall. I would do that as well. Yep, I would go Kenneth over Breece. Kyron over Brian Thomas Jr. That one's probably close. Yeah, it is Kyron Williams over Brian Thomas Jr. Kyron Williams does have a good matchup this week. Definitely a better floor and arguably a higher ceiling. I play Kyron over Breece, yeah. Shakir, Amari, or Hawk at flex. Is the weather an issue in the Bills game tonight? No. The weather is not an issue in the Bills game tonight. It is not. It's going to get a ton of attention. There's going to be, if it's still snowing, going to be up to 2 feet of snow in that game. Before the game, excuse me, not in the game. Up to 2 feet of snow before the game. So there's going to be some really ugly pictures of the whole stadium covered in snow, the whole field covered in snow, but they will clear the field before the game. And then in the game, light snow projected. So yeah, I'm going Shakir over Amari and Hawk. Shakir versus Hawk's actually probably pretty close. Let's compare this quick. I usually don't like starting 2 tight ends, and Shakir has been pretty good. And there's a chance Keon Coleman doesn't play. Man, Hawk projects a little bit better than Shakir here. I did not expect that. Oh, man. I still think I'd probably go Shakir. This is not that close, honestly. I mean, it's close in raw projection, but the boom and bust probabilities are a decent bit better here for Hawk than for Shakir. No, Josh Oliver is very good for Hawk. He had 7 catches for 114 last week, had a season high snap percentage, and that snap percentage can still grow for Hawk too. Maybe you do just go Hawk. I think I'd lean Hawk looking at this. It's tough for me to rationalize Khalil Shakir here over Hawk. Shakir's been pretty consistent floor-wise, but I mean, he has not had the game that we just saw Hawkinson have pretty much all season. So I think it is Hawkinson, but not because of the weather, man. I'm not worried about the weather really at all. But let me pull up the weather report again here on the YouTube live because I know there's some new people in here. If you guys are just joining the YouTube live, guys, hit the like button, smash the subscribe button. If you're watching live on TikTok, guys, hit the follow button. I will not be able to see your comment on TikTok unless you are following. Saquon or Henry this week? Yeah, it's Saquon. It's Saquon over Henry basically every week, like basically regardless of matchup. And then do you got the Eagles or Ravens? Yeah, I got the Eagles. Eagles are 3-point underdogs. I think they covered the 3-point spread there. I do think the Eagles are better than the Ravens right now, but should be a very good game. Should be a close game. I don't feel, super strong about that take. BTJ or Devontae. Yeah, it's Brian Thomas Jr. over Devontae. Allen or Herbert? It's Allen over Herbert. Not concerned about the weather in that game. Shakir or Connor? I'd probably go Shakir there. DK or Shakir? I'd probably go DK. Actually, sorry. Shakir versus Connor. I think I'd go Connor. I didn't expect to tell this many people to bench Shakir, though. Especially with the weather report, me not being too super concerned about it. But yeah, I would go Connor. Hall or Evans? Yeah, I'm going Mike Evans there. I really do not want to bench Mike Evans like at all. I do think Mike Evans is going to hit 1,000 yards this season. And he's going to have to average more than 100 yards per game rest of the way to do it. Nick, I got you with the DK lineup. Daniels or Herbert? I'm going Herb over Daniels. McLaurin or Judy? Yeah, it's McLaurin. It's McLaurin most of the season. Man, McLaurin versus Judy. I think we got Judy well ahead of McLaurin actually here in the projections. Oh, we do. And McLaurin's got a higher ceiling, which kind of makes some sense. Wide receiver ranks, I got you. Ridley or Debo? I'd go Ridley there. DK or JSN? Yeah, we got JSN ahead of DK. I would go Judy over McLaurin. Getting back to that one, I would go Judy over McLaurin. I think McLaurin's a bench in a lot of spots this week. Morning, Samster. Adrian, how we doing? Got 2 TD. Adam or Ladd at flex? Yeah, I would go Ladd over Adams. I would go Ladd over Adams like pretty easily. Let me hop over back to the wide receiver ranks here. Ridley or Jennings? Yeah, so I think it's Jennings over Ridley. Man, it's such a tough call. But with Purdy playing, it's a better matchup for Ridley for sure. But I think the role for Jennings is better. Murray or Herbert? I would go Herbert over Kyler. Evan Ingram, Taysom. Yeah, it's Taysom over Ingram. And I'd play Marvin Harrison Jr. over Ingram too. B-Rob or Ramondre, I'm going Brian Robinson there. I'm playing Ladd over London pretty easily. I'm playing Pittman over Debo. Sam, please, I got you. I will get to all the TikTok live subscriber comments I'll always get to. Devontae or JSN, standard format. Yeah, standard format. I think it's got to be Devontae there. Definitely has a better chance at the touchdown. And then Burrow or Stroud. Yeah, it's Burrow over Stroud. AR-15 or Purdy. Yeah, it's AR-15. It's Anthony Richardson. What's up, Samo? Ruben, how we doing? Yeah, we just got to this one. Hey, Sam, Bateman or Chubb? I think it's Chubb here. I actually think I had Bateman as one of my must benches on the TikTok live. DK Metcalf or Ramondre Stevenson? That one's pretty close, man. This is a good spot for Mondre. Mondre is definitely one of the more difficult start sits of the week because he's been so inconsistent and he's coming off maybe his worst game of the season. 3.3 points. I mean, he's had some bad games. I think he got hurt maybe in this game back in week 2 or week 3, but it's his worst game in a while. He had 13 rushing yards. He scored a 2-point conversion. Without the 2-point conversion, Ramondre Stevenson had 1.3 PPR points. He had no catches. He played 42% of snaps, was outproduced and outplayed and outsnapped by Antonio Gibson. But now he gets the Colts, who are the third best matchup for running backs this season. And we've seen big games from Andre. I mean, just a really wide range of outcomes. But yeah, I'd go Metcalf. I'd go in PPR leagues. You got a guy like Metcalf. You got a guy like Shakir or Ridley or Pittman or Mooney or JSN or Zay Flowers or Jennings. I'm playing all those guys over Andre. Evans or Jefferson. Yeah, I'm not benching Jay Jettas. I'm not. And I like Evans a lot, but they're in different tiers. Evans is in tier 2 for me. Jefferson's in tier 1. Yo, Sam, B-Rob, Najee, or Dell, PPR. This is a good one. Should I drop Jay Brooks to stash a playoff defense? Yeah, I am actually, a lot of people disagree with me on this. I do this in my leagues. In a bunch of my leagues, I'm in the playoffs in all 8 of my high stakes leagues already. Feel very good about that, but I'm not going to celebrate too soon because I know all that matters is the playoffs. Not just getting there, but it's winning in the playoffs. So, I'm not celebrating yet, of course, but I am planning. And in a bunch of those leagues, I do have 3 defenses on my teams. I think it's all the defenses that play the Giants. I forget their exact schedule. I can pull it up here quick. But yeah, I just have all my playoff teams. I'm just going to get to play the Giants each week. Yeah. So I have the Ravens, the Falcons, and the Colts, who I think that is that's week 15, 16, 17 versus the Giants. It's not a bad move just to stash all 3 of those. The Giants offense is in complete shambles. Doesn't really matter what defense they're playing. So the Ravens, Falcons, and Colts are all good defense stashes. And yeah, I'm okay dropping Brooks. I still think there's a big ceiling in the playoffs there, but it's probably going to need Chuba Hubbard missing time to really hit. So, I mean, he's similar to Benson and Braylon Allen, who I want to stash these guys too, especially since all 3 of those guys have good playoff schedules. But onto the start sit here, though. Brian Robinson is probably the option over Najee. Man, Najee projects a bit better. And then Dell. Dell's definitely in the cards here too. Yeah, Najee projects the best. Oh, man, this is not an easy one either. Tank Dell does have by far the highest ceiling here too against the Jags. He played actually a season high 84% of snaps last week. That's pretty encouraging. Had over 100 air yards, 16% target share at least in 4 straight games. Honestly, I kind of feel like this is Tank Dell. Even with these projections, the ceilings aren't comparable here. They're not. I mean, the ceiling for Tank Dell is you just win this week. And I don't think B-Rob and Najee have those same ceilings. The ceiling for Tank Dell and CJ Stroud and this whole passing attack is just so massive. And I mean, is the bust percentage is better. The volume's more locked in for Najee and B-Rob. We talked about Najee. He's got at least 16 opportunities in every single game this season. Hard to find that. So yeah, it's Najee or Tank, in my opinion here. I would go Najee or B-Rob. That one's pretty close, but I do think Jeremy McNichols will still be involved in that Eckler role. Bucky or Breece Hall. Yeah, I'm going Bucky over Breece. Yeah, this is always based on PPR. These are always PPR projections for me, always PPR rankings. My brain only works in PPR, really. Calvin Ridley or Brian Thomas Jr. this week. Yeah, it's BTJ this week. So he's one of the free player props of the week. I feel very good about him in this game versus the Texans. He's going to lead the team in target share, at least among the receivers. Maybe Evan Ingram does it. similar to Marvin Harrison Jr. I like both these guys a lot, both the rookie juniors, Marvin Harrison Jr., Brian Thomas Jr. I got Marvin Harrison Jr. over 3.5 receptions today. I think that one is a borderline lock. The odds aren't amazing. It's like minus 140 or something, but I think he gets at least 5 catches here versus the Vikings. And then Brian Thomas Jr. over 62.5 receiving yards with Trevor Lawrence back in the lineup versus the Texans. Almost every single week, we're seeing at least one receiver do this versus the Texans. They've been crushed by receivers really this whole season. And then Justin Herbert, I like a lot too. Over 247.5 passing yards with no J.K. Dobbins in the lineup. I think they skew a little bit more pass heavy this week. All right, pick 2, Chase Brown, Chuba Hubbard, Bucky Irving. Yes, it's Chase Brown, and then I think it's Bucky over Chuba Hubbard. Yeah, it's Bucky over Chuba Hubbard. I have them in the same tier, but Chase Brown's in tier 1. I mean, Chase Brown's not even close to these guys. Chris, this is a pick 1. Like Chase Brown's in arguably the best running back role right now. I got the QB ranks up on the TikTok live, guys. Shout out to everybody in this live stream right now. We're still just getting started. We're 2 hours in. We got a whole nother hour or so to go. We got an hour and 40 minutes till a bunch of TV on our football screens. I seriously appreciate everybody in this live. I always, around Thanksgiving, always just so thankful for the opportunity I have with Walter Picks, and you guys are all a huge part of that. So seriously, thankful for all of you. Kyle Pitts, Evan Ingram, Mark Andrews, pick 1 to start. Yeah, it's Ingram here. It's Ingram and Mark Andrews and Pitts, man. They've been really similar this season. At one point there were drops. They've been really tough start sits all season. I would go Andrews over Pitts at this point, rest of season and this week. It'll be interesting to see what the Falcons do offensively out of the bye and if they do get Pitts a little bit more involved. But with Trevor Lawrence back in the lineup and all the injuries to the receivers for the Jags and the matchup here versus the Texans have actually been good versus tight ends, but they've been really bad versus slot wide receivers. And in a lot of ways, Evan Ingram is the slot wide receiver for the Jags. Like, he doesn't even really play tight end. So, yeah, I feel pretty good about Evan Ingram this week. CJ or Nix? Yeah, it's got to be CJ over Nix. I'm playing Stevenson over Gus Edwards. Gus Edwards is a bench, guys. He's a bench. He's averaging 3.3 yards per carry. He has 1 catch this whole season. I have Mayfield over Burrow. Yeah, that's not that crazy. Like, they're in the same tier for me. I got Burrow at the top of the tier and Mayfield at the bottom of the tier, but they're projected 0.1 points different. Burrow, Herbert, and Baker all project between 19.1 and 19. So I don't think it's crazy to go, any direction there, really. They're all good options this week. Herbert and Mayfield have the better matchups. I don't really think matchup matters that much for Burrow, though. So personally, I would go Burrow, but yeah, it's close. Taysom or Ladd. Yeah, we're going Ladd over Taysom. Taysom's a must-start tight end, but he's not a must-start flex. He is not a must-start flex. The ceiling is obviously there for Taysom, but yeah, I'm playing Taysom. Let's hop over to the tight end ranks here. I'm seeing a bunch of tight end questions. Pull up the tight end ranks here on YouTube too. Taysom is a must-start tight end, but if you have McBride or you have Kittle, then you don't need to force Taysom into your starting lineup. Like, there's definitely one of my leagues where I'm flexing Taysom, but that's over like Elijah Moore. I would flex Taysom over Elijah Moore, sure. Debo, Hunter Henry, or Nick Westbrook, Akine. Yeah, Nick Westbrook, all I do is score touchdowns, Akine. Yeah, I'm going Debo here, I think, over Nick Westbrook, Akine, and Hunter Henry. I think it's probably close. Let's do this comparison quick, too. But yeah, I think the tight end landscape, honestly, is pretty clear here. I'm seeing a craft question. This is the rankings for only the players left this week. Debo or Mooney, standard. Oh, Brad, I think it's Mooney over Debo. Debo does not project great this week. He has not been good of late, but there's, I think, some reason still for optimism. And we've seen, obviously, historical ceiling for Debo that we haven't really seen this season. Man, the boom percentage is not even close here. Walter certainly remembers the ceiling we know from Debo Samuel. He's only gone over 20 points once this season. And I actually think it was right around this time last year. If we just take a quick look back to the 2023 game logs and look at this, guys, week 13, week 14, last season, Debo went over 34 points. He had at least 34 points in both week 13 and week 14 last season. This is a playoff game for the 49ers. They lose, they're basically done. They're under 10% chance to make the playoffs. You got to think there's some reason for a Debo ceiling game here. See, I'm playing Debo over Henry and Nick Westbrook-Akine like super easily. And there's a lot of spots we're going to have to bench Debo for sure. Tucker Kraft is not on this list. He already played. This is the guys that haven't played yet this week. Hey, Sam, Ladd or Garrett Wilson? Yeah, it's Ladd, man. It's Ladd. Here we are. It's week 13. I would have definitely been surprised at this back in week 1. Bless you. Thank you. I definitely would have been surprised by this back in week 1, but I mean, Ladd is really like impossible to bench right now. We got him projected for 17.4 this week. He's been at least 14 in each of his last 2 games. He's got at least 5 catches in 5 of his last 6 games, and not a bad matchup here versus the Falcons. He's had over 80 yards in back-to-back games. He got him projected just over 80 yards this week, and Garrett Wilson's projected a little bit ahead of Adams. I actually think Adams, though, out-targets Garrett Wilson, and I would play Adams over Garrett Wilson. It's close, for sure. But I have Taysom and Hawkinson. Who do I start? Yeah, it's Taysom. It's Taysom. I think it's Taysom. I think Hawkinson's a good option, but no tight end has the ceiling that Taysom has. Hey, Sam, thanks for all the help. Need to pick a flex in the tight end. McBride, Taysom, McLaurin, and Debo. Yeah, so you're starting McBride here, and then McLaurin, Debo, and Taysom. I think you probably go with one of the receivers over Taysom Hill. Let's see. Yeah, it's McLaurin. Wow, Taysom projects better than Debo. Taysom kind of in a Debo-like role, if you really think about it, like a better version of Debo role. So I would play Taysom over Debo. Man, doesn't feel right, but it is right. Taysom over McLaurin is close, man. Taysom does have a higher ceiling here. He does. I mean, there's a good argument for Taysom in this spot. Taysom or Pollard? Oh, man, a lot of Taysom questions this week, and rightfully so. I mean, he had 45 points last game. I mean, McLaurin and Debo are not, 42 points last game. McLaurin and Debo are not getting to 42. Even in those ceiling games last season, we were just looking at for Debo. He wasn't getting to 42 points. But guys, Taysom's not getting to 42 again this season either. Like, we did already see the best Taysom game. I think I'd go Scary Terry here, but there's a very good argument for Taysom. And like in a lot of spots like this, when the projections are so close, but the ceiling is just so clearly bigger for one guy like it is for Taysom, I usually lean towards the ceiling. Man, I think my official answer here is Taysom. It's a close one. I want to say Terry because I don't like starting 2 tight ends, but Taysom's not even really a tight end. Shakir or Devontae? Yeah, I'm going Devontae over Shakir. If you guys are on TikTok, guys, make sure you hit the follow button. I won't be able to see your comment unless you follow. If you're on YouTube, guys, smash the like and subscribe button. I do appreciate that. Taysom versus Pollard. I've seen that in a couple comments. Let me pull this one up too. God, again, my gut says Pollard, but I feel like when we look at this and we think about the ceiling here, this is pretty similar to the McLaurin start sit, right? Where the floor is a bit better for Pollard, the floor is a bit better for McLaurin, the projection's a bit better for McLaurin, a bit better for Pollard, but the ceiling is not close. I think it's Taysom again here. I think I'd go Taysom over Pollard. Hey, Sam, Ertz or Goddard? Yeah, I'm going Goddard over Ertz. Thanks for the gift, Jacob. No Kittle. No, Kittle's here. Kittle's at tight end too. It's probably covered a little bit, but yeah, it's McBride then Kittle. Otten or Hill? Yeah, it's Hill over Otten. Oh, sorry, I didn't get to that. Baker, Herbert, or Daniels? Yeah, I would go Herbert, then Baker, then Daniels. Carter, I'd go Herbert, then Baker, then Daniels. Schuba or Brian Thomas Jr.? I think it's Brian Thomas Jr. this week. McPherson or Moody? Yeah, I'd probably go McPherson. Ladd, Garrett, Brian Thomas Jr., pick 2. Yes, you're benching Garrett Wilson here. You're playing Brian Thomas Jr. and Ladd over Garrett Wilson, the 2 rookies. I'm playing all 3 rookies. Marv, Brian Thomas Jr., and Ladd all over Garrett Wilson. I'm playing them all over Garrett Wilson and Adams. And I actually disagree with our projection slightly here between Garrett Wilson and Adams. I think I would go Adams over Garrett Wilson. Hey, Sam, really need your help. Michael, how we doing, man? Marvin Harrison Jr., Taysom, or Bucky at flex. I can only start one. I'm starting McBride and have to start the Minnesota defense. Yeah, that kind of sucks. You got McBride and maybe Marv here versus I think this one's probably Bucky, though. I think we actually looked at this, Marv versus Bucky, earlier, and it was Bucky. I was a little surprised by that, but I do think it makes sense. And I think this is like near the line, too. I'm not starting Taysom in this one. Like, I'm not. Even Marv has a higher ceiling than Taysom, according to the Walter Picks app, which I think is reasonable. Taysom versus Jennings is probably pretty close. We'll look at that one in a second. But yeah, I would go Bucky here. I'd play Bucky Irving over Taysom and over Marv. Let's do Taysom versus Jennings, man. This is another big Taysom week. Clearly, yeah, it's Jennings. We're going Jennings over Taysom. Running back rankings, please. I got you with the running back ranks. Let me know in the TikTok live which position you guys want to see next. Xavier, hope you had a great Thanksgiving as well. Need some playoff help. Do I roster Gus or Benson? I'd go Benson and Corum, I think. What is the ceiling, man, for Gus? Like, his role is undoubtedly better. Undoubtedly. That the role is better for Gus than Benson and Corum. Like, you still need an injury. Like, you need James Conner or Kyron Williams to miss time. But at least there's a real ceiling case. Gus has 1 catch this season. And he's averaging 3.3 yards per carry. I mean, he's not been good. So, yeah, I really would roster Benson and Corum over Gus. Like, Gus is not really a guy I want on my teams. I'm not that scared of Gus being a league winner. I'm not. Morning, Sam. Need a W in a bad way this week. Hawk or Taysom? Stevenson or Connor? Wilson, Ladd, or BTJ full PR? Yeah, so it's Ladd, then it's Brian Thomas Jr., then it's Garrett Wilson. Let's switch over to the wide receiver ranks here. Seeing some people ask for that on the TikTok live. Najee Harris or T. Higgins? Got to be T. Higgins. Playing Taysom over Otten. We're playing Taysom over Hawk, too. I like Hawkinson this week, but not as much as Taysom with the role he had. Taysom had 10 targets. Is it 10 catches? Was it 10 catches or 10 targets? His last game, it was 8 catches, 10 targets, which was a 35% target share. He had a 35% target share and a 25% rush share. Jamal Williams is back this week, but I mean, it's hard to care that much about that. Williams has been washed for multiple seasons. Now, clearly not as effective as Taysom in the run game. All right, then Stevenson versus Connor. I think that one's James Conner over Stevenson. There's definitely a ceiling for Ramondre in this game, but he's coming off arguably his worst game of the season. He had 1.3 points last week before his 2-point conversion. He was outsnapped and outproduced by Antonio Gibson last week. And then, yeah, I'm going Ladd over these other receivers. Mayfield or Burrow. I'm going Burrow personally. It's super close, though. Mayfield, Burrow, and Herbert all project within 0.1 points of each other. Michael Pittman or Rashad. I think I'd go Pittman there. We're not playing Taysom over Ladd. We're not playing Taysom over Juwan Jennings. I guess we got to decide where the line is here for Ladd McConkey. And it's probably, for Taysom Hill, it's probably right around Juwan Jennings. Taysom versus Zay, Taysom versus JSN, Taysom versus Mooney, Taysom versus Pittman versus Ridley. Like, it's super close there. And I think there's a good argument for Taysom in all those. I'm not playing Taysom over Juwan. I think I did say Taysom over McLaurin, who I'm a little bit more down on than our projections. I'd go Taysom over Debo, over Elijah Moore, over Douglas. Leggett versus Vele versus Gus Edwards. Oh, man. That one's probably Vele. Vele versus Leggett is close. I actually think Leggett. And then let's put Gus Edwards in here. Gus Edwards should see volume. Yeah, it's Leggett. It's Leggett over Gus Edwards, and I'd both them over Vele. Addison over Gus Edwards for me as well. I think Gus Edwards is a bench. Let me go to the must benches here again. I think I had Gus Edwards here in the must benches. Yeah, I did. Gus Edwards, I don't want to start. Travis Etienne, I don't want to start. Tank Bigsby, I don't want to start. Antonio Gibson, I'm pretty nervous to start too. London or Sutton, full PPR. Yeah, this one's pretty close. I think it's London. Sutton's been balling, man. Sutton was on my do not draft list. That's aged pretty horribly. That's definitely an L so far for me. He started slow. He had 4 games under 8 points in his first 7, but he's been over 14 now in 5 straight games, coming off his best game of the season last week. Sutton's not a guy you like benching, but yeah, you got to bench him for London. Yeah, I don't really want to start Bateman this week either. Bateman's been on a bit of a heater, but he's had pretty low volume. Yeah, he had 12.3 points, only 2 catches in back-to-back games. We've seen under 4 catches for Bateman in 4 of his last 5 games. Chase Brown's a must start. London versus Ladd, it's Ladd. There's very few guys I'm starting Ladd. I'm benching Ladd for. Taysom Hill, Devontae Adams, or Ramondre in the flex. Yeah, I'm going Adams. I'm going Adams over Taysom. Sutton or Evans. I think it's Evans. Juwan Jennings or Ridley. I got Jennings over Ridley. It's a really close one there too. They're both in the same tier for me. I got Ridley in tier 6, Jennings in tier 5. I don't want to underrate Jennings with Purdy back, man. And even without Purdy, he went over 25% target share. He's averaging close to a 30% target share in games without Ayuk or without Debo. Yeah, he was at 27% last week. So he's been at least 26% target share still this season in every game. Now he's up to 4 or 5 of these games without Debo or Ayuk. I'm going Kyron Williams over Bucky, but it's super close. Bowers isn't in this list because this is only guys that haven't played yet this week. Bowers is tight end 1 rest of the season. Hey, Sam, Chase Brown or Puka? Oh, man. I'm not benching Puka this week, man. I like Chase Brown as much as anyone. Tougher matchup for Chase Brown, though. Puka Nacua is about as safe as it gets in fantasy. Like, it really doesn't get much safer than Puka. He's been over 18 points in every game since he's been back, other than the game he got ejected. So as long as he doesn't get ejected, I mean, you're looking at 18 plus from Puka. What was the prop of the day? Yeah, James, I got 3 props of the day. I feel really good about all 3 of these, and I like them in this order too. I have confidence in them in this order. So I got Jay Herbo over 247.5 passing yards. We've seen 4 straight games where teams have passed over this line versus the Atlanta Falcons. And then I got Marvin Harrison Jr. over 3.5 receptions. This feels like a borderline lock versus the Vikings in a game where the Cardinals are underdogs. And then Brian Thomas Jr. over 62.5 receiving yards versus the Texans. I like that one a lot as well. Those are the 3 free player props today. Hey, Sam, I already lined these up on the Walter Picks app, but I'd like your insight. Josh, thanks, man. Yeah, guys, if you haven't checked out the Walter Picks app yet, you got to check it out. It is a free app that I've spent the last 4 years of my life helping build. It's powered by Walter, an AI model with the best fantasy projections you will possibly find. Way better than the Yahoo projections, the ESPN projections, and the sleeper projections that you're looking at in your where you play your leagues. So Josh, thanks for trying it out, man. It's the best way you could possibly support me. I do appreciate it a ton. Go to QB. I got you. I'd go Lad over T, I think, but it's close. All right, let's get to this start sit here. DK, Terry, Garrett Wilson, or Breece Hall. I have to start 2. Yeah, this is probably the last 2 here. It's kind of sketchy to start both Garrett Wilson and Breece too, but I don't know how you bench Breece in this spot. Assuming this is PPR too. I think it's Metcalf too over Terry. I think we actually have Terry over Metcalf. I don't even feel great about that. I think it's Breece and Wilson. Let's do Metcalf versus. Take Breece out of here. McLaurin, right? Yeah. McLaurin's a tough start sit this week for sure. Yeah, it's Garrett Wilson and Breece. It's a little scary too versus the Seahawks. Again, their defense has been playing much better. The Jets defense ranks number 1 versus receivers this season, but that's not fully accurate. They've really been much worse. The last leg was Brian Thomas Jr. over yards, 62.5 yards. I like Marv receptions, Brian Thomas Jr. yards, and Herbert yards. Kyler or A-Rich, I think it's Kyler. Yeah, so the Jets have allowed the 5th fewest points per game to receivers, 5th fewest yards, 2nd fewest receptions. Thanks for doing the TikTok Live subscription. Appreciate you. We're going to get to all the TikTok Live subscriber comments like we always do. Josh Downs did pretty well last week, though. We saw Marv do well. Tank Dell did well. It's not like you can't do well versus the Jets secondary these days. But yeah, I still think it's Garrett Wilson over and Breece over the other 2. Hey, Sam, start Debo, Jennings, or Judy. Yeah, let's hop back over to the wide receiver. Garrett Wilson or Jonathan Taylor for utilities. Oh, God, I think I would go JT over Garrett Wilson. Yeah, Josh Allen versus Lamar. I think you go Lamar. DK or Mooney. Man. Yeah, I think it's Mooney over DK Metcalf. And in this one, I would go Jennings and Judy over Debo. And again, I think there's like a good chance we see the ceiling Debo game finally. But I'm going Juwan over him. Juwan's out-targeted him pretty consistently now. And even with Purdy in the lineup, he's out-targeted him. And Judy's coming up back-to-back great games. Really tough matchup here for Judy. Like, I don't think it's crazy to go with Debo and Jennings in this spot. And then you just lock in, most of the pass game for the 49ers. Obviously, CMC and Kittle will be involved too, though. I think I would go with Juwan and with Judy. Ridley or Judy? Yeah, this one's like, I don't really agree with how far apart these guys are projecting. They're really not that far. 1.5 point difference. Ridley's got the higher ceiling, though. I think I would go Ridley over Judy. I think I would go Ridley over Judy, Sutton over Judy, Adams over Judy, maybe even Juwan Jennings over Judy, and then it's Judy. I'm playing Brian Thomas Jr. over Mooney pretty easily. First place for the first time, and it wouldn't be possible without your help. Let's go, man. Let's go. Sutton or Pickens. In first place, it's a big accomplishment, especially if it's the first time. But what really matters is winning the championship. We don't want to get ahead of ourselves. Making the playoffs is huge, but it's all about churning out wins starting in week 15. So very excited to try to help you do that. Sutton or Pickens? Yeah, it's Pickens, man. I don't think you can bench Pickens this week in almost all spots. I mean, I got Higgins over him, Evans, McConkey, and Kupp, and then the tier 1 guys, Jefferson, Puka, Chase, Nico, and AJ Brown. But as good as Sutton's been, man, Pickens has been better, I think, like in terms of the role, in terms of just the pure role. He's had at least a 26% target share in 7 of his last 8 games. He's got the 6th highest target share in the NFL, George Pickens. He's got the 5th most air yards in the league too. I mean, his yards per route run is in the top 20. And I don't want to take away from how good Sutton's been too. I mean, he's been better for fantasy in terms of fantasy points scored over the last 5 games than Pickens has. But I mean, the volume is just not quite comparable. He's actually up there in air yards too. It's actually closer than I even realized. But yeah, I'm going Pickens over Sutton. A better matchup, I would say, probably for Pickens as well. So yeah, I'm going Pickens. Brian Thomas Jr. or Devontae. I'm going with Brian Thomas Jr. guys over a lot of other options. Unless you have Drake London or Pickens or T or Mike Evans or Ladd, like you got to start Brian Thomas Jr. versus the Texans. Guys, his prop line's at 62.5, and I think he smashes over on that. DK or Marvin Harrison Jr. Yes, Marv for me over DK. Morning Sam. Start one at flex, Bucky, London, or Chuba Hubbard. Yeah, this one's close too. I think we do have Bucky over Chuba Hubbard. I think I agree with that. But over London, it's a good spot for Bucky for sure. Yeah, this is super, super close. I think I would go Bucky Irving Cooper over Drake London. I'm playing Higgins over Brian Thomas Jr. B-Rob or Pittman. I think I'd go Pittman over B-Rob if that's a PPR league. Sutton or Adams or Brian Thomas Jr. Sutton or Adams or Brian Thomas Jr. Purdy or Kyler. Yeah, so I'm going Kyler over Purdy, and I'm going Brian Thomas Jr. over Sutton, and that one's close. But yeah, I would go BTJ over Sutton. JT for Jennings, especially with JT bye. Yeah, I'm going JT over Jennings. I feel pretty good about Jonathan Taylor amongst all weeks. Like this feels like maybe one of the best spots for JT all season. The Pats have not been good defensively versus running backs. The Colts are without a bunch of their offensive line, but JT's been bad, pretty bad over the last month or so. He hasn't been over 20 points since week 3. The only time he's been over 20 points all season. He does have 2 games over 100 rushing yards. He just hasn't gotten the end zone, and he's got no receiving role with A-Rich starting. Let's actually do this quick. JT versus Jennings. It's JT, man. Yeah, it's JT. MBS, Debo, or Westbrook Akine. It's got to be Debo there, man. We're not starting MBS over Debo. I refuse to do that. And honestly, Marquez Valdes-Scantling versus Nick Westbrook, all I do is score touchdowns. Akine, I think it's pretty close. I think it's pretty close. This is 1.6% boom probability for Scantling. Where like I wouldn't knock you for going Scantling in this spot, but Westbrook Akine is he has a 35% touchdown rate this season. I mean, absolutely insane. Completely unsustainable, but absolutely insane. Hey Sam, Broncos or Texans defense? Yeah, so I do have defense ranks. I actually don't think I've shown them on the YouTube live. Let me pull those up. It's Broncos. Yeah, Broncos are the number 1 defense this week. They get Winston. I mean, it's about as good a spot. They get Winston at home, and they're 6-point favorites in that game too. Devontae or Dell? Yeah, I don't think Devontae Smith is playing, so it's Dell. I think Devontae Smith is out. Greetings, Sam. Should I start Shakir or Tank Dell? Yeah, that one's close too. Let me go to the must starts, must benches. So I have Devontae as a must bench because I do not think he's playing. It's part of the reason AJ Brown is, I think, going to absolutely smash this week. All right, Shakir versus Dell. That one's pretty close too. I think it's Dell. I think Shakir maybe projects a tiny bit better, but Dell has such a high ceiling versus the Jags, man. Such a high ceiling. Like we haven't seen the ceiling for Dell yet, really this whole season. Why not today though? Versus the Jaguars. I mean, the Jaguars have been the worst defense in the NFL. Just across the board, the worst. I mean, they're worse than the Panthers. They're worse than the Buccaneers. They've allowed 172 yards to receivers this season, over a touchdown per game, over 12 catches. I think Nico pops off again. I mean, Nico had 12 catches for 151 and a touchdown last time out. Dell did not play versus the Jags in that game. And just in their last game, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Jameson Williams, they combined for almost 300 yards and 3 touchdowns versus the Jaguars. I mean, I think Tank Dell's ceiling is big enough to justify him over Scantling. Over Shakir this week. Yeah, I can go to the QBs. I got you. Calvin Ridley or Gus Edwards at the flex. Yeah, it's Ridley. It's got to be Ridley over Gus. Bench Gus. Why is Darnold the bench? The Cardinals defense has just been a bit streaky. Like they could run into the good version of the Cardinals defense. Ceiling for Nico and Will Dissly at flex and Tank Dell and Najee at flex. Yeah, definitely I'd go Nico and Dissly over Tank and Najee. Yeah. Sorry, I think I did skip that one. I'll get back to that. Happy Sunday, Sam. Less than 11 days of the playoffs. Wow, let's go. PPR need one. DK, Debo, or Brian Thomas. Yeah, it's Brian Thomas. Ethan, happy NFL Sunday to you as well. Also hope all of you guys had a great Thanksgiving. It's my favorite holiday of the year. Did not disappoint again this year. A-Rich or Kyler. Yeah, so I got Kyler ahead of A-Rich. I think that this is a really close one between Anthony Richardson and Kyler. Let's pull up this comparison. I do like Anthony Richardson a lot today. I think there's a real ceiling here for Anthony Richardson. He's got 20 carries in his last 2 games, got 2 rushing touchdowns in his last 2 games. I mean, he's got a great chance at a rushing TD. And this is exactly how we have in the Walter Picks app too. The ceiling is higher for Anthony Richardson, but the floor's a bit better. The projection's a bit better for Kyler. This is not a bad matchup here for Kyler. The Vikings rank 22nd versus QBs. This season, Kyler coming off a pretty disappointing game, only 11 points. He did throw for 285 passing yards, though. That was actually his second most of the season last week versus the Seahawks. Just no touchdowns, and he barely ran at all. So, yeah, I think if you want to risk it and go for the ceiling, it's A-Rich, but I personally would go Kyler here. I think that Kyler's a slightly better option than Anthony Richardson. Debo or Sutton, yeah, it's got to be Sutton over Debo for sure this week. I don't think that one's that close. Najee or DK Metcalf, I think I would go DK over Najee. DK was outplayed by Jalen Warren last game. Najee probably projects a bit better here. Yeah, he does, but the ceiling's better for DK. I'm going DK. Dissly or Ingram, it's Ingram. Judy or Debo, I'm going Judy over Debo as well. Hey, Sam, Breeze, K9, London, or Sutton need a wide receiver 2/flex and an 8-man. Yeah, it's K9. I think it's K9 over London and Sutton. Let's go back to the receiver ranks here. Yeah, London, I like a little bit more than Sutton. Let's do London versus Kenneth Walker. I think that's pretty much the question here. And yeah, it's Kenneth. It's Kenneth over London. A pretty good spot here for Kenneth versus the Jets. He's maybe getting a bit underrated in this spot too. Jets have been, they did well versus JT last week, but the Cardinals crushed them. I mean, over 35 points allowed to the Cardinals running backs, and Joe Mixon went for 17. Mondre had 24. Najee had 16. That was one of his best games. Morning, Sam. Need some help, especially if that was half PPR, which I think it was. I need some help, Sam. Help at wide receiver. Garrett Wilson or DK? I would go Garrett Wilson over DK. I do not think Ramondre is a super safe start. I'd say he's an okay start. I think Good is probably stretching it a bit. Again, Ramondre had 1.3 points last game until he scored his 2-point conversion. Then he had 3.3. I mean, it was maybe the worst game of the season, and he was outsnapped and outproduced and was less efficient than Antonio Gibson. So you got to wonder like a little bit about what the role even is for Ramondre, who's been under 4 yards a carry every single game other than week 5 and week 1 this season. The good matchup for the running backs, though, for the Pats. I would go Jennings. I'm not worried about the snow. Yeah, I'm playing Jennings over Ramondre. Yeah, put Bucky in the flex. I would play Bucky easily over Ramondre. And I would play Jennings over Ramondre too. And again, don't worry about the snow. It's going to be light snow during the game. All the heavy snow is before the game, and then they're going to clear the field. All that snow does not matter. I don't care if it snows 10 feet before the game. 10 feet's maybe an exaggeration. But 2 feet, I don't care if it's happening before the game. Light snow during the game. Let me pull up the weather report again. Let me also just refresh the news here, make sure the weather report hasn't changed, but Trevor Lawrence is active. Breece Hall is active. Alec Pierce is active. DJ Chark is active. Haven't really seen him do anything. Pop Douglas is active. All of those were expected. Jabril Peppers is active. Marshawn Lattimore, CJ Mosley, those guys are inactive. Brock Purdy will play, but isn't 100% healthy. Tajay Spears will play. That's pretty much it. Head coach on Marvin Harrison Jr. said, we're going to get him going today. The passing game will go through Marvin Harrison Jr. Man, that line's probably moved from 3.5 receptions, but 4.5, I'd like 2. The prop of the day, yeah, we were just talking about this. I was just reading that quote from the coach. But yeah, it's Jay Herbo over passing yards. It's Marvin Harrison Jr. over receptions. I like his yards line too, Marv. And then Brian Thomas Jr. over 62.5 receiving yards. Those are the free player props of the day. Feel very, very good about all three of those. We are 62% on the free player props this season. BTJ or JSN, full PPR. I'm going BTJ over JSN. I feel very good about him. Just talked about him with the free player props. The Texans are a very good matchup for the receivers. Taysom or McBride. We're going McBride over Taysom. It's McBride, then Kittle, then Taysom. Only the guys that haven't played this week are on these rankings. I've had the defenses up for a while here. Go to the wide receivers. Yeah, I would go BTJ over Juwan. I do not think Devontae Smith is playing today. You won't find him on the rankings. I think he's out. It seems like that's what they expect. It's definitely close. Sam, thanks for making the Walter Picks app such an effective tool. Thanks, Adam. I appreciate it. Yeah, guys, if you haven't checked out the Walter Picks app yet, do not know what you're waiting for. It is a free app. It is going to help you with fantasy and with props. Link is in the TikTok bio and in the YouTube description. Mooney, Quentin Johnson, or Najee. Yeah, I think this one's Mooney. You're definitely not Quentin here. It's between Mooney and Najee. I wouldn't be surprised, by the way, to see Quentin bounce back, but you definitely can't start him. I mean, you definitely can't start him. Let's go to Quentin here. We'll include him anyways. Najee versus Mooney is close, man. I think I would lean Mooney. I think I would lean Mooney with the ceiling. Like, I feel like I've said that in a lot of these spots with Najee Harris here, where if I go to the receiver ranks quick on the TikTok live, I'm playing Mooney over Najee. I'm playing Pittman over Najee. I'm playing Ridley over Najee. All these guys project for a little bit less than Najee, but have way better ceilings. There is no ceiling really for Najee. I mean, he's got to score multiple touchdowns, which I don't think we've seen him do once yet. Not once this season. I mean, has he scored multiple touchdowns like a single time in his whole career? We've seen one game over 20 points this season for Najee. The floor is good for Najee, especially if you have a big lead or something. But the ceiling is not there. And the ceiling's there for a lot of these receivers. Ridley, Pittman, Mooney, JSN, Flowers, Jennings, even McLaurin, who I'm not super excited about this week. Adams, Sutton, Judy, Garrett Wilson, Marr, Brian Thomas Jr., and all the above. God bless you, Sam. I hope life outside of football is a blessing. Thanks, Jared. Man, I appreciate the positivity. Flex, 12-man PPR, Pollard, Shakir, Pittman, or Thomas Jr. Yeah, it's BTJ. It's got to be Brian Thomas here. I actually don't think this one's like that close. Again, Brian Thomas Jr.'s prop line is at 62.5 today. That's well above what Shakir's at. It's well above what Pittman's at. Honestly, I think this one's between Pollard and Brian Thomas Jr. And I think there's a good argument that Pollard actually has a safer floor than Brian Thomas Jr. Often is the case with the running backs versus the receivers. And yeah, this is exactly what the Walter Picks app is showing here as well. Pollard only has a 25% chance to go under 10. And the Commanders are allowing 5 yards per carry this season. I think that's dead last among defenses versus running backs. Not a bad spot here for Pollard, but it's a really, really good spot, I think, for Brian Thomas Jr. I think he smashes over that prop line too. So yeah, I like Brian Thomas Jr. here over Pollard. I think the ceiling's just really, really high for him in this spot. Can you go to running backs? Yeah, I got you. Again, if you're watching live on TikTok, guys, hit the follow button. What's your code for Walter Picks? My code is Sam. Code Sam. You can see it on the TikTok live here. Code Sam. If you sign up for the Walter Picks app, I'll put this up on the YouTube live too quick. But yeah, if you guys have not downloaded the Walter Picks app yet, use code SAM. You'll get a free 7-day trial when you sign up to all the premium features. It's a free app, but there's also premium features as well if you use code Sam. Start Sutton or Garrett Wilson. Oh, man, that one's close. Thoughts on Adam Thielen? Yeah, I'll give you some Panthers thoughts here in a second. Sutton versus Garrett Wilson is a tough call, and I think Garrett Wilson projects a bit better. Garrett Wilson is just better, but the matchup's better for Sutton for sure. The Seahawks defense is getting better each week. I think Devontae Adams probably out-targets Garrett Wilson. It's a very weird situation with the Jets, where all these reports have come out that basically say this Aaron Rodgers is done. Like, he's done with the Jets. But he's not done with the Jets. He has a game today for the Jets. You know, and Devontae Adams, he got to come to the Jets. You know, you got a disgruntled Aaron Rodgers here against a defense that's playing pretty well. Like, it's definitely possible we just see it completely collapse today for the Jets. I mean, motivation's got to be either at an all-time low or an all-time high right now for Rodgers. And at some level, Aaron Rodgers is really like playing for his next job opportunity, where it is not guaranteed for 41-year-old Aaron Rodgers, after everything that's transpired with the Jets, that he gets a starting job next year. Like, this could be the last game he plays for the Jets, depending on how it goes. And like this, I don't think it's a guarantee that he plays next season if he doesn't get a starting job somewhere. Will he really go somewhere and be a backup? Like, probably not. Really intriguing storylines around the Jets offense and Aaron Rodgers, I think, heading into this game. But all that to say, I do think it's Garrett Wilson over Sutton. My gut says Sutton over Garrett Wilson, but everything else I think points to Garrett Wilson. Wow, Sutton's been a little bit worse this season in basically every single category: yards, points, touchdowns, snap percentage, all the receiving stats, I assume. Yeah, target share, targets per game, receptions per game. A little bit less efficient. I mean, a little bit more efficient than Garrett, which is surprising. But I think it's Garrett Wilson over Sutton, but it's close, man. I don't think it's crazy to go Sutton over Garrett Wilson. Thoughts on Adam Thielen? Yeah, let's go to the Panthers here quick. So the Panthers, David Moore actually projects as the best Panthers wide receiver today. I was pretty surprised when I saw this. But when you look more into it, it makes sense. He had a 30% target share last game. He had 20 points last game versus the Chiefs. And now he gets the Bucs without their slot corner. They're missing their starting slot corner, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. David Moore mostly operating out of the slot. I think at least one of these three receivers, Moore, Leggett, or Thielen, will end up playing well. But yeah, Moore is probably my pick. I would rather bench Thielen. Monty's not on here. None of the guys that have already played are on these rankings. These are rest of this week rankings. McBride or Hall? Yeah, I'm going Hall. I don't want to start two tight ends. Like, you should be starting McBride, though. He's the number one tight end left, unless you already started Bowers or Kelsey or something. Pick 2, Mooney, Jennings, Dell. Yeah, these guys are really close. I think some really tough wide receiver decisions this week. All of these guys bunched together. I mean, definitely the toughest wide receiver decisions, I think, this week are Garrett Wilson, Jerry Jeudy, Terry McLaurin, Juwan Jennings. I think Metcalf's pretty tough. Shakir is tough in that Bills game. Ridley's kind of a tough one. Mooney's in there too. And Debo, he's in there too. So you got several of these guys in the start sit. I kind of think this is going to be Mooney or Jennings. Yeah, it's Mooney or Jennings here over Tank. And I really like the ceiling for Tank this week versus the Jags, but I think it's Jennings. Yeah, I think it's Jennings. Hi, bro. What's going on, bro? How we doing? Hey, Sam, happy week 13. Happy week 13 to you as well. Yeah, we got a ton of Taysom questions this week, and rightfully so. I mean, he scored 42.5 points in his last game. He had 10 targets for a 35% target share, and he also had a 25% rush share and over 100 rushing yards and 3 rushing touchdowns. I mean, a truly all-time game from Taysom. And we're not going to see that again. Obviously, no one expects that, but it's Taysom here, man. It's Taysom, especially in half PPR. I think it's Taysom. A more touchdown ceiling, more of a receiving upside too. Connor, Pollard, B-Rob, choose 2, and Jeudy, Garrett, or Shakir, pick 1. Yeah, Connor, Pollard, and B-Rob definitely all close together. Let's hop back over to the running back ranks here on the YouTube live quick. I will toggle over to those. Terry, that low is absolutely insane. Is it that insane, though, for Terry? Let me talk more about Terry here in a second, because he is pretty low, but I think there's a pretty good justification for that. All right, Connor, Pollard, and he's lower than he's been, most of the last month and a half, 2 months. But the underlying usage for McLaurin's definitely been kind of concerning. And yeah, this one's Pollard, then Connor, then B-Rob. The Commanders have allowed 5 yards a carry this season. Spears is playing He's close between Pollard and Connor, but yeah, I think I agree with that. I think I would go Pollard over Connor. Let's talk about McLaurin here for a second, because I've definitely told more people than usual to bench McLaurin this week, and we've been pretty high on McLaurin most of the season, and he's had at least 15 points now in 6 of his last 7 games. 6 of his last 7 games. But I think the Commanders, they're spreading the ball around more than people realize. Terry McLaurin's been under a 19% target share in 4 straight games. And last week, he scored all of his fantasy points on a 70-yard touchdown at the end of the game. He would have been at like 7 points last week if he didn't score the. And I don't want to just take the 75-yard touchdown away from him. Obviously, that's a bad way to look at things. But I think last week was just a little bit worse usage-wise than people really get. And really the last 2 weeks, usage-wise, have not been great. He's under 18% in 2 straight. He hasn't been over 30% target share once since like week 4. So I just think the volume's just a little bit worse. And McLaurin versus Taysom is close, man. I think we talked about this one earlier too. Like Taysom does have a higher ceiling than McLaurin. McLaurin projects better than Taysom. I lean Taysom over McLaurin. It feels gross, and it's not what my initial thought was when I was asked this one earlier. But I think I do lean Taysom over McLaurin. I lean Taysom. Like I think I'd play Jennings over McLaurin. I'd play Jennings over Taysom. I think Taysom though, like over guys like Shakir and guys like McLaurin, even Metcalf, maybe Debo, I would play him over Stafford or Booty. Is that what that question was? Stafford? Oh, or Burrow. Yeah, Stafford over Booty, obviously. Burrow over Stafford, though, for sure. Terry or Rashad at flex. I think that one's Terry McLaurin over Rashad. Thanks for the follow, guys, in the TikTok live. Appreciate it. I won't be able to see your comments if you aren't following on TikTok. B-Rob or Debo? I think that one's got to be B-Rob. Debo's got a higher ceiling, though, almost definitely. So it depends a bit what you're optimizing for. Yeah, Debo's ceiling's way higher. Man, I kind of want to say Debo in a lot of these spots too with this ceiling. I think in this one I would go Hall, then Jennings, then Taysom. I'd play Breece Hall, then Juwan Jennings, then Taysom. I'm playing McConkey over JT and Hubbard, I think. I'm not benching McConkey. I'm not doing it. Man, these guys just will not go away in the YouTube live. Let's do Ladd. Was it Ladd versus Jonathan Taylor? Yeah, it's Ladd. It's Ladd over JT. I think it's Ladd over Aaron Jones too. I think I actually would go Aaron Jones over Jonathan Taylor. Yeah, Aaron Jones over Jonathan Taylor, but I don't think Aaron Jones over Ladd. Yeah, it's Ladd. Just barely. It's Ladd. Must-win week here. Terry or Jennings? Man. McLaurin, we got 1 spot ahead of Jennings. I personally would go Jennings over McLaurin. The target share has been better for Jennings than McLaurin. Like, not even that close. Jennings is averaging more points per game. He's averaging more target share. And this is including the games with Ayuk and Debo. In the games without Ayuk or Debo, Jennings is over a 30% target share on average. We haven't seen McLaurin hit a 30% target share since week 4. And it's obviously not only about target share like we've seen from McLaurin. I mean, McLaurin's been balling in fantasy. He's averaging almost 15 points per game. That's top 20. Yeah. Why is it deleting all my comments? I don't know. Chris Stark, I got you, though. We're going to get to the TikTok live subscriber-only comment mode here coming up momentarily. Let's just recap really quick. So quickly, the weather update, because there's way too many people talking about the weather when it really is not going to impact things too dramatically. It feels like 12 degrees tonight in this Bills 49ers game. There's a bunch of games where it feels cold. I'd go McConkey over Hubbard and JT, yeah. There's going to be light snow, though. There's 2 feet of snow before the game, but that does not matter. They're going to clear the field before the game. It's going to be completely clear of snow. And then there might be light snow during the game. There is going to be 20 to 25 mile an hour wind gusts in this Bills 49ers game, but don't overreact here. We're not over the 25 mile an hour wind threshold. There's not going to be significant snow in this game. And it's just cold. It's cold. The cold does not matter unless it's extreme cold. This is not extreme cold. Same thing with the Steelers, Bengals, Seahawks, Jets, Colts, Pats. It's going to feel like 20 degrees, but just not concerned weather-wise. The 3 free player props of the day. Jay Herbo, over 247.5 passing yards. Marvin Harrison Jr., over 3.5 receptions. I think this line might have already moved from the start of the live because the coach came out and said something about getting Marv involved. I like him over 4.5 receptions too at better odds. I like the yards line for Marvin Harrison Jr. too. That's not the official play, but I do like Marvin Harrison Jr.'s props. I think overall he's pretty underrated. Would you cut Olave? Yeah, cut Olave. Yes, you don't need to have Olave on your team. Brian Thomas Jr. is the last free player prop, over 62.5 receiving yards versus the Texans. JT versus Brian Thomas Jr. is close. I probably would go JT there in fantasy, but I like Brian Thomas Jr.'s props a lot, and I like him a lot in fantasy as well. Pick 3, please. Dell, Marvin Harrison Jr., Shakir, Jennings. Yeah, so it's Dell, Shakir, and Jennings. Don't play Marvin Harrison. Don't play Marquez Valdes-Scantling there. I'm playing Marv over JSN pretty easily. Marv versus Jonathan Taylor is pretty close. Let's check that one out. That one might be JT. Yeah, that one I think I would go Jonathan Taylor over Marv. Judy or Debo? I'd go Judy over Debo. Shakir, Najee, Judy, Pollard. Yeah, this one's Pollard and Judy over Shakir and Najee. London or Higgins? Yeah, it's Higgins over London. I'm not benching Higgins with how good he's played. I don't think you can bench Higgins regardless of matchup. I'm going Ladd over Jennings. Jawan, Pickens, McConkey, or Bucky, pick 2. Yeah, it's the middle 2 here, I think. Pickens, McConkey, and Bucky. I think I'd go Pickens and McConkey over Bucky. I like both these receivers just so much. Bucky's a great option this week too. Yeah, man, Pickens versus Bucky's super close. But I think you play Pickens and you play Ladd. I'm playing Bucky over like most of the other options though. Adams, I just see Bucky versus Adams. I'd go Bucky there over Devontae Adams. Brad, I got you. Higgins, Jefferson, Sutton, Evans, or K9. Pick 2. Yeah, it's K9 and Jefferson, I think. Or it's Jefferson and Evans. I'm not playing Higgins or Sutton over Evans or Justin Jefferson. Chase Brown or Bucky. Yeah, you're not benching Chase Brown. You can't bench Chase Brown in basically all situations. The only situation today where I said to bench Chase Brown, I think, was for Puka Nacua. That was like an 8-man league or something. But yeah, otherwise, you got to start. Show must starts, please. Yeah, so I'll pull those up on the TikTok live quick. I actually don't have them on the YouTube live. But the must starts, I got Burrow, Herbert, Baker, Stroud, and Richardson as my QB must starts. At running back, I like James Cook, Bucky, Chuba Hubbard, and Najee and Pollard, not bad options. Najee is the floor play, though, and not a ceiling option. At wide receiver, a lot of good wide receivers this week. I really like McConkey, Mike Evans, Pickens, Brian Thomas Jr., and Marv. At tight end, McBride, Kittle, Taysom, Hawkinson, and Njoku, and Ingram. Defenses I like today, Broncos, Colts, and Commanders. The guys I'd rather bench this week, Purdy, Darnold, Drake May, Trevor Lawrence. I think Lawrence and Purdy, similar spots, very risky this week. Running backs, Gus Edwards, do not start him. He's averaging 3.3 yards per carry, only has 1 catch this season. I think the Chargers will throw a lot more this week. I'd rather bench ETN and Bigsby and Antonio Gibson. The Pats running backs, I think, are really risky as well, even in a good matchup. McConkey over Hubbard, because McConkey is a top 10 wide receiver option. I mean, he's been incredibly consistent. He's been by far the best Chargers receiver. He's got at least 5 catches in 5 of his last 6 games. He's got back-to-back games now with 6 catches and 80-plus yards. And it's a good matchup for him, too. I think T. Higgins over Sutton is close, but I would go T. Chase Brown, CMC, Kyron, pick 2. Yeah, I'm benching CMC there, I think. Actually, I might be benching Kyron Williams there. Yeah, I'd bench Kyron. I'd play CMC over Kyron. I'm playing Chase Brown over both of them. I think I would go Pollard over Garrett Wilson, but that one's close. Let's actually do that one quick. I don't know if I feel strongly about that. Man, yeah, it's Garrett Wilson over Pollard. I'd go Stroud over Daniels. I feel very good about Stroud today, too. I'd play Taysom over Ingram, Sutton over JSN, Burrow over Stroud, Marvin Harrison Jr. over Ramondre Stevenson, Taysom not over Kittle. No, I'm playing Kittle over Taysom. YouTube Live, guys. That's my time. Time's the most valuable thing we have. Thanks for spending some time with me today. I'll be back. I'll be live for a little bit longer on TikTok, answering the TikTok Live subscriber comments. Guys, if I didn't get your comments, seriously, I appreciate you all so much for tuning in. I try to get as many as I can. I can never get to all of them. Go to the Walter Picks app, which I've had on the YouTube Live on screen the whole time, and it will help you with the rest of the start sits you have. I do like Jonnu Smith rest of the season. He's been absolutely balling. He's a top 10 tight end rest of the season, I would say. Brees, Terry, Adams, Tank. Yeah, I think we talked about this one, I think, earlier, too. I think it's Brees and Adams here over Terry and Tank. All right, that's my time, guys. Kylo, I think it's Mooney over Addison. I'd go T over Sutton here as well. I'll be live on TikTok for the next 20 minutes or so before we wrap up. Thanks so much for tuning in, guys. Make sure you hit that subscribe button on YouTube so you don't miss the future lives. And have a great Sunday and good luck, everybody.